Testing, testing.
Good morning. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. And we have the agenda for adoption. Are there any changes required to the agenda? Seeing none, then the agenda is adopted by consent. And we have the Qualicum Beach OCP discussion forum. How we did this last time, staff will present a recommendation. Council can ask questions and make comments, but before we do anything else, I'll turn to the gallery if there's any comments from folks in the gallery. And then council will make a recommendation to council. Now the committee makes a recommendation to council. So decision points for Vision Community Plan Development. Mr. Sale, would you like to make some introductory comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I do have slides that pertain to each of the decision points as well. But as a general introduction, I would just like to provide the background that we have been in the official community plan review since the beginning of the year. We started with the quality of life survey. We've done an extensive community engagement, both in person and also more surveys online. So at this point in the process, we as staff are ready to go and start working on actually developing the policies and writing those sections of the OCP that may need to be amended based on the updated requirements and community input. But before that drafting process happens, there's a number of areas where council direction is required. So that's the reason that this is before council today. So in considering all the discussions to date, we essentially distilled it down into a number of decision points. And what we're looking for from council in the committee of the whole meeting today is a general indication of whether we're going left or right on some of these policy issues, because then we can take that away and work on it over the summer. So I would like to add that some of these topics are complex, and this is the first part of a process. In other words, today's decision isn't necessarily the final decision. You will be considering, drafts later this year. We'll have actual written policies in front of council in September, and then have opportunities to amend it later on. So I wanted to offer that just to let you know that today is not the last time you're going to see these. It's just going to give staff information that we need in order to start working on it. But if you're not clear on which way you want to go on some of these, we can take more time. But I would recommend not taking more time on all 19. I think that would be less helpful. So with that, Mayor Westbrook, if it's okay, I'll just jump in on the first decision point, and I'll provide a brief summary, and then provide it, or go back to you for questions, and then, as you mentioned, for maybe community input. So as we prepare to move forward into the WAM, the Ways to Achieve Attainable Market Housing project, we prepare to start that process. One of the key inputs to developing detailed housing plans was a discussion about who the town should be focusing on in housing policies and housing initiatives. So providing some clarity in the official community plan would translate directly into the WAM process, and also provide clarity in future years when the town's looking to initiate a housing program or more policy or zoning amendments, et cetera. So based on community input we've heard, there were a few groups that really popped out as frequently coming up, both in in-person discussions and also in online surveys. So those groups are highlighted here in the survey. This is actually directly from the online survey, but essentially we're looking at families, young adults, workers, and older seniors. Those groups came up over and over again in discussions. So this is an area where we're looking for the direction from council, because we are going to draft some policies for council consideration, but some guidance now would be helpful. So staff's recommendation is that those policies be based on an identification of young people and families, workers, and older seniors designated as priority housing groups. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Thank you. Just for clarification, there was a recommendation about us receiving the review, the summary review. I will ask for that motion when we're done, so all of the decision points have been discussed. And also that the OCP working group was not part of these recommendations or these decision points. And we have a number of those volunteers in our chamber, and I want to thank you for the work you've done. It's been quite a heavy load, but we appreciate you sticking with us to get to this point. So for the first point, what is Council's wish? Decision point 1. Councilor Skipsey.
I had a couple of questions about this. I noticed that the people with a disability was almost equal to the seniors, older seniors, and I wondered why that maybe that we haven't included people with a disability, because I know that housing can be a difficult thing for many people with disabilities, finding suitable housing. So I just wondered why they were perhaps left off when they're almost exactly the same percentage as older seniors.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. The slide you're looking at there is direct from the online survey. So those statistics were very close in the online survey. Persons with disabilities didn't come up quite as often in the in-person discussions. So that's why those 4 were identified. But having said that, it's entirely up to council. So if council would like to see persons with disabilities added as a 5th item on those priority housing groups, we can certainly do that. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Council? You have some.
I have one other one. I'm trying to imagine what this actually looks like in practice. So whether we're talking about incorporating these groups into proposals that are coming before us, or whether we're talking about separate different housing projects. So like, for instance, when a proposal comes forward, are we now going to be thinking about, well, maybe we need 3 or 4 bedrooms in this project. So I just wanted to ask that. And I would ask maybe council to consider adding the people with disabilities later when we adopt the motion.
Okay. Mr. Sills, any thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you. So generally, there'd be two categories where these types of policies would be applied. One, council could consider this when considering zoning amendments, which is sort of the scenario that Councillor Skipsey alluded to. The other is where maybe the town is an active participant in some sort of a housing initiative, whether it's through a partnership with a nonprofit or identifying opportunities in some other way, incentives, for example. So it could be either way. It could be in response to applications coming in, or it could be a part of initiatives that the town is stepping forward with. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that probably a lot of these categories that you have, there would be overlap. For example, there might be a young person living with children that is in the workforce, or an older senior that has a disability. So I don't know if there's any way to allow for that. It's just, I would have thought that it would be difficult for people to say this group, and this group, because there is a lot of overlap. So that was just my comment.
Thank you. Anyone from the gallery on this particular item? Yes, ma'am. Can you come to the microphone? And just for the record, just state your name, please.
Marie Noel. The question I had is, when people were answering this question and identifying themselves, could they identify themselves as more than one category? Were they invited to do so?
Question? Refer this to question to staff.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I was just confirming, yes, the option was available to choose more than one category.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Tim, coming up.
Tim Pritchard speaking. I'd like to address what is right in the statement of the decision where it talks about ways to achieve attainable market housing. That comes up right at the front of the RFP for the consultant study. In the original draft of that RFP, it referred to affordable. After various committee discussions, the word attainable was put in. But there's a complication here, because when the committee was talking about housing, it was affordable at one end of the spectrum, market housing at the other end of the spectrum, and a broad category of attainable in the middle. But this statement now is using the term attainable market. Which is it? Attainable, or is it market housing? So I think there's needs to be clarity here, because I don't think this is intended to deal with market-based housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Mr. Pritchard identifies that there is a challenge in combining, market housing with the concept of attainability, affordability. That is the challenge we're looking at through the WHAM housing project. So at this time, I can't say here's the solution to doing that, but that's why we're going through the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the gallery? Yes, come on up, sir.
Jim Noel, the survey talks about showing support for these groups. Is that the same as need for these groups to have housing?
Good question. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So need and support are slightly different. So the concept of need can be assessed through things like the census and through kind of empirical research provided by outside agencies. And a lot of that is covered in the interim housing needs report that was prepared last year. That is slightly different from asking the question of our residents where they would like to see our focus in future years. And so that is the way that the question was phrased, was more about where would you like to see the focus? Because there's multiple groups that do have need, but we only have so many resources. We only have so much time and financial support. So where would our residents like to see the support? And that is the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Council, would you like to make a motion according to this recommendation? Councilor Skipsey?
Well, I would like to move that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that young people and families, workers, older seniors, and people with a disability be designated as priority housing groups.
Thank you. Seconded, Councilor Young. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Number 2.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The second decision point under consideration today is related to land use. So this is 4 parcels just north of the Qualicum Beach Airport. And this parcel on the left-hand side there is owned by the town. The 2 in the middle are privately owned, and the parcel on the right-hand side, the east of this land assembly, is owned by the town. So there was a lot of discussion in the working groups and amongst the community consultation about possibilities that could make different use of this in the future. Currently, all 4 of these parcels are zoned for rural residential use, essentially. So when the discussion came up, it seemed that there was a fair amount of interest in exploring other opportunities for this land. So when as staff, we look to kind of translate that input into some sort of policy that could be implemented through the OCP, we described it in what is up here as an airport mixed-use area, recognizing that because it's immediately adjacent to the airport, there might be an opportunity to include, live-work housing or something like that, something creative that's not strictly residential, but it's also not strictly airport. It might be some creative mix of those uses. So that is the recommendation before council today, is that the official community plan designate those areas as a designation described as an airport mixed-use area that supports residential, live-work housing, and light industry, subject to conditions related to noise buffering from the Chartwell neighborhood, aircraft noise attenuation and unit design, and 10-year model that supports the provision of attainable housing for local service workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from council? Councilor Vanderbock.
Thank you. I did have a question in your reference to light industry, what this might be, if you have ideas about that. I'll ask that question first. Thanks.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. And the answer to that question, through the chair to Councillor Vanderbock, the answer will be similar to other answers we'll have today, in that OCP policy level language is pretty high. And when we get down into the specific details of what light industrial uses might be permitted or not, that's at a zoning level, right? So we'll get to that level eventually if council endorses the general idea of these types of uses. So in the town doesn't have heavy industry. Our light industry is predominantly things like, maintenance. The aircraft uses or aircraft maintenance functions are also one category of industry. So it could be quite broad, but at the same time, council could decide to hone in on specific light industrial uses later through the zoning process. So that's not an answer we'll need to develop today. Thank you.
I'm also wondering, in the final words of the recommendation, provision supports the provision of attainable housing for local service workers. Is there a reason why you are specifying only local service workers? Why not just have it provision of attainable housing, period?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Vanderbock. That could be left broad. The local service workers were identified here in discussions about what types of groups would be perhaps most compatible living immediately adjacent to an airport. thought that maybe service workers, as opposed to the other groups we talked about earlier, with, families, older seniors, and persons with disabilities, maybe service workers would be the most compatible. But if council wants to keep it more general, that's certainly an option.
From the gallery, any comments on this particular point? Yes, coming up, Marie.
Can you confirm that this change of use for that particular land would not preclude the town from using that land as the new location for their yard and works maintenance facility?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you, through the chair, to the question. And so that the public works yard is a light industrial use. So although that wasn't necessarily the concept that was discussed when this initiative was put forward, it would be compatible.
Okay. Anyone else from the gallery? What is council's wish? If you want to amend this, Councilor Van der Valken, you certainly have freedom to do that.
I would like to amend it to end at supports the provision of attainable housing, period.
Okay, so that's the motion that you make, and that just deletes the words "for local service workers." And you second that, Councilor Skipsey? Thank you. Discussion. So that's your motion as presented, except for the last three words. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Number 3, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item is also related to a specific parcel of land. The land under discussion is immediately adjacent of the Pheasant Glen Golf Course. So council will be familiar with this development area, which is a comprehensive development zone that was approved years ago in the official community plan as a destination resort. And more recently, it was amended to allow permanent residential development as well in this parcel. Immediately to the east of that development area is the former landfill site, and it's owned by the town. So that's just for context. So the parcel in question is kind of an upside down L shape, and it came up a lot in discussions, not only because the landowner was present, but because some of our residents were interested in exploring what opportunities might exist if a larger parcel were engaged. So this parcel is approximately 80 acres. So the types of uses and combination of walking trails, parks, and et cetera, a lot more can be considered on a larger parcel, and so that did pique the interest of some of our residents. So some of the strengths that could be considered if council were to contemplate this for residential use, it's large enough that there could be significant green spaces preserved. The parcel also lends itself to a significant contribution towards the town's anticipated housing demand over the next 20 years. On the other hand, the major drawback for this parcel is it is somewhat removed from the town center. So we would consider this to be largely car dependent, although there is an opportunity for walking trails, especially recreational walking trails in this area. So it's not to say that people would be living in their cars, but when they're trying to access goods and services, they would be driving to the downtown. So the recommendation from staff is that this does warrant consideration. However, if this were to be considered, there would have to be a significant benefit to the town that would be developed in consultation with the property owner. So we're not recommending this move forward at this point. I think further discussions are required with the landowner. So I think it's no secret that the land manager is Mosaic Forestry, and they have a number of other forested parcels in the area that might be of interest as a potential amenity. So that discussion is one that council would need to have. So if council has no interest in seeing residential use on this parcel, then it could be a clear no today. If council is sort of willing to wait and see what the opportunities are, then the recommendation that staff is putting forward, that it be deferred until those details are provided, that would be a better way to go. So with those two options in front of you, thank you.
Thank you. And you've made that very clear that it would be deferred until further information. Council, any comments? Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I do have a question. You have elaborated a bit what a possible amenity would be, but is there any way to say whether it would be, for example, targeted to the groups that we've identified, which seems to be more important to me because a lot of the housing projects that we've had come forward are not dealing with that. So I guess I would be okay with waiting to see what the possible alternatives or community benefit might be. But when you ask for it to be deferred, how long are you wanting to defer it?
Mr. Sales, until further information is provided.
Yes, thank you. So in answer to that question, discussion about specific parcels of land or those types of negotiations would likely be in camera. So that discussion, should council say, yes, wait, let's have some more information, the discussion would start in camera and then would evolve into an open discussion at a later point.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I'll just say that my preference, coastal Douglas fir forests are becoming more and more rare on the east coast of Vancouver Island. And once development happens, there's never an opportunity to go back. So my preference would be to move alternative one and not go forward with this. But I'm open to hearing from the public.
Thank you. Councillor Young, go ahead.
I'd like to see it deferred and just to kind of keep it in our horizons there because we do need to fulfill the densification that's been asked by the province. So whether this will fit some of the categories that we're hoping to cover, it will help with densification needs. So I would like it deferred and for further discussion.
Thank you. From the gallery. Yes, John, come on up.
John Wood from Qualicum Beach. My question is very simple. What's the current zoning of that parcel?
Mr. Seals.
Thank you. It's zoned for rural use, and it cannot be subdivided under the current zoning.
So it's not agricultural land reserve?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Tim.
Several points, if I may. First, this is not, by any way, as some members of council know, a new proposal. The predecessor, Island Timberlands, made this proposal as one of what was then called the big ideas in the 2011 OCP. So this has been floating around for almost 15 years. And somewhere on the town's website, you'll find a 4-page write-up which describes this. I don't know how many of you have seen that. And the Mosaic, the proponent, may not propose the same thing, but provides some very good information as you referred to the size of it. It also talked at the time about smaller lots and smaller houses and trails that would integrate with what was being then planned at Pheasant Glen. So this isn't something new off the wall. This is something that that's been fomenting for a long time, but the climate didn't seem right. And maybe with the Bill 44 requirements, this is a better time. So I just leave it at that. The one other thing is reference has been made to the growth in it, but I'm not aware. Timberlands is the owner. Could they log that site if they chose to, regardless of whether there was a development or not? I don't know. Thank you.
I would think they can log it if they wish. It's their property, and that's what they have the right to do. Anyone else from the gallery? Yes, Susan, coming up.
Well, that's high.
You can bend it right down if you like.
Susan Lloyd. I think it should be kept in the mix. I don't think it should be rejected at this point. One of the things that we're going to have to grapple with is, of course, land use and available land. And I think that there are, when you look at a lot of the comments that came from people and you start to look at what are the trade-offs between doing one thing and doing another, I think at this point we need to keep all of these things in the potential mix, and then we can evaluate at a later stage what it is that we want to do. Petronella's comment about whether it would meet the needs of the target groups that we've looked at, it's not going to, I would say, in some circumstances. For example, seniors. I don't think it really would, but I don't think that should be the determining factor at this point. I think we should keep a broad net. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and Councillor Van der Valk, and we should address members of council by their councillor. I don't think Councillor Van der Valk would limit the use of the property for just those groups. I think there were more groups in the mix that are identified as people we need to address for housing. Anything else from the gallery? Council, what is your wish? To move it as presented, that means deferring it for a later meeting? Go ahead.
I am concerned about the pressure that's being put on us to build housing, period. So it seems to me that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have these groups that we've identified as needing housing.
Yep.
And there already is a lot of expensive market housing being built. And we're looking at what I think what the province has been trying to do in terms of its Bill 44 is more gentle densification. So looking at the land that's already in the town, how can we increase the density that way? So the big projects are kind of counter to that idea of gentle densification. So generally speaking, I am not in favor of, for a number of reasons. This is far away, it's a big parcel, we don't know who it's going to be available to or built for, but I'm happy to defer it if we think that that information will be of benefit in making a decision at a later point.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to the effect of the recommendation? Councillor Young, you make the motion. Councillor Van der Valk, are you seconding it?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Skipsey opposed. Thank you. Estate properties, number 4.
Yes,
Mr. Ailes?
thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next decision point for council's consideration is regarding the estate properties. So this is another area that has come up in discussion, and I think you'll see, as summarized in the memo, that there was some pretty strong opposition to do anything in this area, and at the same time there was also some interest in exploring other options in this area. So just for background, I think most people are aware, but it's on the Old Island Highway. It does front on the ocean. These parcels are large, so generally ranging between 10 and 40 acres for the larger ones. Because of the size of this area, if council were to consider some sort of a comprehensive planning exercise, there could be buffers retained, and for example, the integrity of Milner Gardens could be retained while exploring other uses. So just entirely up for the council's discussion. I think, as noted, there's support for exploring other things and also opposition. The recommendation from staff, recognizing that there is a balance of interest in the community, is that for the time being, certainly now, the town maintain the existing designations that protect these areas as estate residential in the current 2025 official community plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Comments from council? Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I just have a question. I know not that long ago, one of the estate properties was listed for sale and advertised with logging potential. And I wonder if the tree bylaw now changes that, that opportunity, I guess I'd call it.
Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. The tree protection bylaw does prohibit wholesale removal of trees. Parcels are allowed to remove 1 tree per year per acre. So the larger parcels could, over an extended period of time, remove a large number of trees on the parcel, but it would be an extremely slow logging process. So to describe it as logging, I think, would be a bit generous.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Councillor Van der Valk.
I'm wondering if you do, this is not in the urban containment boundary, correct? Do you have a map of the urban containment boundary for the town?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Valk. And you mentioned this yesterday, and I apologize, I did not include a map of the urban containment boundary on the entire town, but what we're looking at on the screen up here essentially is the area that is excluded from the urban containment boundary. So as you go over here, Eagle Crest is within the urban containment boundary, not the golf course, the residential areas. And then there is an area that was excluded from the urban containment boundary for the development that was done at 2075 Island Highway, 850 Eagle Crest Drive. So that subdivision's already done now. And so, yes, it is outside the urban containment boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone from the gallery like to speak to this? Would council like to make a motion as per recognition? Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Skipsey moves, Councillor Van der Valk seconding. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item under consideration is regarding the town's existing public works yard. As stands right now, the town is still in a process of exploring the needs of our operations departments, and so at this time, there's not an immediate need or desire to relocate. Sorry, I see people pointing and scowling. Oh, we skipped number 5.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we come back to number 6? How about that? My apologies. I advanced a little too fast. Okay, so the next decision point is number 5. Thank you for clarifying. And that is regarding town boundary expansions. So there was discussion in our community consultation meetings about what's happening just outside the town boundary. And what happens just outside the town boundary has a big influence on the town, because as we can look through the history of the town, there's been many occasions where development of some sort has occurred on the fringes of the town, and then the town has eventually incorporated that into the town and had to upgrade infrastructure, et cetera. So there was discussions about potentially exploring what those uses might be on the fringe, both for the potential to, limit development in some areas, and then potentially strategically actually control and guide development in other areas. So the recommendation for consideration today is that the draft 2025 official community plan would state that boundary extensions will only be entertained when a significant environmental or community benefit can be secured. So essentially that type of policy language says, yes, it can be considered, but outlines some qualifications to that statement. And then the second recommendation in here today would be a policy that would go in the OCP to encourage the regional district of Nanaimo to not change any land designations on the fringe of the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from council? Anyone from the gallery wishing to speak on this? Thank you. Go ahead. Well, back to council now.
I will ask a question then. I just wondered if there were any specific properties that were in mind or that were mentioned during the process.
Mr. Seals?
Yes, thank you. So when we look at the map of the town, including the surrounding area, one of the biggest constraints is the agricultural land reserve in terms of development, right? So there's only a few areas on the fringe of the town that are not in the agricultural land reserve. Clearly to the east, those existing residential properties are not in the ALR. Then near the airport, what we'd refer to as the bird streets, those are all not in the ALR and, generally like an acre-ish in terms of large residential parcels. And then to the west of the town, just on the fringe of the town, there's some large forestry holdings there that are not in the ALR. Thank you.
Okay, so could I have a motion, Councillor Van Vogt?
Sorry, I did have a question as well. So do we have criteria for what constitutes a significant community benefit? Because that seems rather subjective.
Mr. Seals?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Brandenbach. It is subjective, and ultimately it would be council that would determine what that significant community benefit is. If council already has a clear idea of what types of benefits should be on the table when we consider boundary expansions, by all means, those could be articulated in a policy like this. But as of right now, it would be subjective and up to the decision of council.
Okay. So, staff recommendation is a double-barreled one. Does council feel comfortable? Did I ask anyone else to speak? Can I just make one comment? Sure, come on up. I think I did ask, but nobody showed any hands, so it's okay. Go ahead.
Susan Lloyd. One just small point in decision point 5.1. In the description, Luke, to staff, it referred to or community benefit, significant environmental or community benefit. This says and, so I would just suggest that small change. And the question I have is we've just talked about the Mosaic property, and that's outside the urban containment boundary. And now we're talking about this, and I'm just wondering, how do the two relate? And I don't want to see us get into a situation where we agree to certain things that are going to be in the OCP and they don't quite go together, or they could create some conflict. So that would be my concern about how this fits with some of the other discussions that we're having. Thank you.
Mr. Seals, can we reconcile those 2 points?
Yes, thank you. So through the chair to the delegation's question. So when we're talking about boundary expansions on this slide, what we're talking about is things that are actually outside of the town's jurisdiction. So in theory, the regional district could approve development on the fringe of the town without requiring approval from the town, right? So not to say that that's a likely scenario, but it certainly has happened in the past, and that is a possibility. The urban containment boundary is a smaller boundary within the town's jurisdiction. It currently excludes areas like the estate properties and also excludes the agricultural land reserve. So when the town wants to increase its urban development area, it expands that urban containment boundary, but it can only expand it to the town boundaries. Any further than that, then the town would have to do a boundary expansion. So there's, the language is somewhat similar, and of course gets confused by the fact that the regional district has a growth containment boundary, which is different entirely. But they do make sense. I think it's just a matter of different spheres of authority. Urban containment boundary is entirely within our sphere of authority. The town boundary, the municipal boundary, draws that line between where our jurisdiction stops.
Okay.
Sorry. So the situation with Mosaic then would be a situation where it's not contained within our urban containment boundary, but it's within our municipal boundary. Is that correct? Okay.
And by the way, if people tend to speak often, and that's good, take a front row seat. We're very friendly up here. So I think that answers all the discussion for now, unless I see more hands. Council, what is your wish? Councillor Skipsey? Move the recommendation, both of them? Thank you. Second by Councillor Young. Further discussion. Councillor Bennevalk.
I think the point was made regarding the wording significant environmental and community benefit can be secured. I think that it should be and, not or. So it would be, yeah, okay.
And so that's what we did. Great, thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. So that was a good suggestion about and or. Point number 6. We already started on that, but you have to start again. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So this relates to the town's existing works yard on Fern Road East. It's immediately adjacent to the area referred to as the East Village, where there's currently a brewery and residential development. The question has been asked whether or not the East Village area should be expanded to include the works yard itself. So the town is early in the process of exploring the needs of that site, and also the, what it would look like, and if that area were to be either refreshed or relocated. So at this time, it's really too soon to say it's definitely moving, right? So having said that, it does make sense to combine it into the East Village area, just because it's there, and when we consider land use, it is adjacent to and should be planned for together. So the recommendation is that it should be included into the East Village area for the purpose of exploring opportunities, but that would all be subject to the identification of another replacement for the public works yard. Thank you.
Thank you. And as far as I'm concerned, we should defer this until we decide whether we do want to relocate that. Any comments from council? Thank you. Anybody from the gallery on this point? Thank you. Council make a decision. I would move that we defer this until we have a suitable replacement site for public works yard. Councilor Skipsey seconding. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Number 7.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item under consideration is an area of agricultural land reserve on Berwick Road. So this has come up in discussions a number of times. Some of the landowners were represented at the community meetings that we had, and just for context, I think everyone would be aware that it is very close, within walking distance of the commercial area. Very, very close to Memorial, very close to Quality Foods, et cetera. So the question has been asked: would the town consider residential development on that site? Similar to the Mosaic property, this has been considered by council in the past, but it continues to be a live discussion, and so it is before council once again today to see whether there's interest in maintaining the town's policies with regard to this area, which would mean it stays in the ALR and residential development isn't explored, or whether the town wants to explore this as a site with potential for residential development. The town, through consultation, we heard pretty strong opinions on both sides. So once again, it's not an area where there was overwhelming support for it, but very clearly there is interest among some residents in seeing development because it is so close to the commercial core, right? So from a geographical kind of walkability perspective, this has a lot of advantages. So the staff recommendation at this time is, based on the fact that there is a pretty strong divergence of opinion, and it's weighted somewhat evenly. We see, in the quality of life survey and in past quality of life surveys. Once again, that kind of balance, relatively balanced in terms of support for and or encouragement of maintaining policies. So the recommendation from staff today is that the existing policies be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you. Council comments, questions? Councilor Skipsey.
Well, I just wanted to remind everyone, too, that ultimately the decision is outside of this council table, that it's up to the ALC whether the land stays in the ALR or not. So I just wanted to make sure people were clear on that.
Yeah, I think people know, but the ALC also requests input from council before they consider it. Any other comments? Councilor Young.
I know this has been a live discussion for many, many years, and given now that there is a requirement for density and the importance of a food supply chain that's local, can we not get a little more creative in making this land that's workable, where that we can figure out how much yield that this kind of size of a property is expected to yield? Could we not get maybe a group of co-op farmers so that we have housing for a number of families and that they're growing food equivalent to what that acreage or property could yield in the ARL?
Questions, comments? Gallery, any questions, comments?
Greg Husband. I approached the subject of this particular area from the point of view of the future sustainability of the community and broader strategies where people who are older want to downsize their properties from the suburban areas into the center of the town, smaller units. And I think there's a responsibility of the town to have that transition occur. But we also need to understand that from the demographics of this country as well as other industrialized countries, the population, older population is going to collapse eventually in the next 20 years. And so we're being faced with a smaller population. If you look at the resident population of the country and not including immigrants. So sustainability, long-term economic sustainability is really important to make sure that this community remains attractive to people who wish to come here and keep it economically alive. I think we're cutting off our nose to spite our face to say that block of land or even half of it could not be brought into the town. And it's a political question, of course. And I think the case has to be made by a council who believes that sustainability is extremely important for our future, to a government that is not probably particularly aware or doesn't particularly care about that proposition, that is sustainability. Thank you.
Anyone else from the gallery? Tim and then Mary.
Tim Pritchard. This matter was considered in the 2018, let's call it OCP, and by the committee, and actually it was a committee vote at the time taken that was very close and a little controversial, but I'll forget about that. One of the things that should be considered in this is that when you address this property in particular possibly being out of the ALR, it can be considered in terms of a land swap where an equal or greater amount of land adjoining somewhere of the town that isn't in the ALR could be put into the ALR. And that could be a real factor here in considering this. It shouldn't be looked at in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie, and then Switzy.
Marie Noel. In this decision, what we're actually saying is it's a political decision of whether or not we want to support removing ALR land to make more housing. And that obviously causes that land to rise significantly in value. And normally that lift would be something that the town council could use to negotiate benefit for the town. Things like community amenity, things like, I don't know, extra things in the deal. I'd prefer to see that left on a deal-by-deal basis rather than today saying we're on support to move all this stuff out of the ALR if people want to build on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Switzy.
Thank you, Council. My name is Switzy DeWitt. I happen to be one of the property owners. To just refresh everyone's memory, and there are a few new staff members here that may not be familiar. When we go right back to 2011, the quantity of the survey, and correct me, Luke, if I'm wrong, the total quantity of the survey was around 2,300 square people, and this last one was about 1,300. Of that 2,500, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, 60% of them said they wanted to have the ALR land looked at, which equals to the whole quantity of what, in fact, your responses have been for this particular OCP. Something to consider. Significant. If we're dealing with the voice of the community, you cannot ignore it. That's absolute. The other thing is that in all the research that I've done, Bob Weir has said all the services are there and have been there since the town's been created, because the anticipation at the time was for a greater volume of residential in Qualicum in totality. So that's something to be considered, that there's no real upgrades that need to occur. I find it interesting that the phrase of carbon footprint's not coming up. It was the highest thing to be discussed on the 2011, that we had to be environmentally friendly and within walking distance of town, which unfortunately this piece of land lies right in it. Now let's not play games too much, shall we? When the airplane flew over and the blankets all fell down on the ALR, wherever they landed, they made them ALR. That's somewhat the scenario, because that property has never been farmed. I'm attempting to do even some haying on it, and I can hardly get any hay off of it. So the long and short of it is it only makes common sense to, within walking distance of this community, uniquely the apartment that got filled before it was finished in the East Village. By whom? Locals. There's a strong desire of locals who have committed themselves to living in Qualicum and wishing their latter days to be in Qualicum.
Beach.
Beach.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So the long and short of it is the evidence is there. It's really quite simple. Just add a few words to your particular phrase, with the exception of within walking distance of the town regarding the ALR. A couple of words. What that will do is it'll give opportunity to explore the different options. I can assure you, the desire and the directive is there. The ability to do something very unique for this beautiful town is there. The visions that have been offered are there. There is no conflict with ALR on this issue. I can stand here and tell you I've been politically involved significantly, federally, provincially, and also municipally. I challenge the ALC to look at us as a community, to say these old folks, they could never have that ALR land removed. You gotta be frickin' kidding. I can assure you that they're gonna shudder when they see the application coming forward as a desire from this community who has managed itself well. But there are areas to be improved, and there are opportunities to explore. And the biggest of them are creating development within walking distance of town. And the evidence is there for you people, by fact and by data, that it is actually the will of the town. I'm one of the owners. QF is one of the owners. I've offered to the town to consider the ALR land that is not, the land that is not in the ALR, which is across from the airport. I'd like it to be on public record that that has occurred. That piece of land, why is it not in the ALR? It's above the airstrip. I can give you a little bit something interesting to consider too, that that land should be removed from this designation and transfer the ALR designation into it. And the community gardens can go in there and they could start growing cabbages. And that way, when the plane can't make it to the runway, they can land in the cabbage patch. Anyways, the long and short, it's kind of cute because in fact, that's what that land cannot ever be developed by the town. It can never have any buildings on it for the airstrip, and that makes sense. It happens to be 22 acres in size, which is virtually what this complete parcel is. And it's just something to consider because there could be a financial benefit for the community too with that. You know, you did just finish purchasing the property on the beach. A good substantial portion of it could have been paid by this consideration as an opportunity for the benefit of the community. I can tell you, the people that will be moving into that particular parcel would be very grateful for this town council to at least offer the opportunity in a futuristic document, which is what this is, to have that consideration. I would ask the words to be flexible, for Luke to create with his staff to give you guidance of how to achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Go ahead, Susan.
Nope. It's not mine.
Does it say do it? Oh, I didn't, it's not mine.
Yeah, I don't know whose it is. Susan Lloyd. You know, I don't disagree with the comments that have just been made. And I think that there is a problem in some sense when we look at the results from the Quality of Life Survey and we look at discrete comments that were made at certain times to certain questions. You know, these answers are given without context. They're given without consideration of what's involved in a particular decision or, you know, I want this, I want that, I don't want this, I don't want that. When you put it all together, obviously walkability is highly valued, and that does meet the need of seniors. We look at the land use of our town, and you take out the various areas that are green space, that are ALR, that are for this, that are for that, that are outside. You look at what's outside the urban containment boundary, you know, and you start to look at what is left. And if people do not want anything over 3 stories in the downtown core, then in my view, something's got to give. We have to find available land somewhere, and that land that is in the town core is extremely valuable to a lot of the people who want to make the town their forever home, who want to make certain transitions out of neighborhoods like Eaglecrest that will then free up family homes for families. So, you know, I understand the concern that if you open up the ALR, all of a sudden, you know, we may not have any of that left, and that there is a need for sustainable food production and things like that. But a lot of that land is just not being used. And so I think we need to think carefully about whether there are particular pieces, particular projects that meet a lot of our needs, but just might happen to be now designated ALR. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Marie.
Marie Noel. I just wanted to say one last thing, and that's about if you choose to leave this in the OCP, you still have the right at any time to make an amendment to the OCP. And when you make an amendment to the OCP, you end up doing a hearing, public hearing, so you get current and fresh input from the public. With something that's as significant as this, I think that's an appropriate approach.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Despite you going up.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I'd like to recommend that that last opportunity doesn't get explored because, quite frankly, history and we who have funds in which to create something need a little bit of encouragement. And for a serious proposal to come forward, those types of proposals cost a fair amount of money. And when we had Randall or Rent here, it was about $100,000. So if Randall or Rent comes forward from who is a world-renowned planning agriculturist, he point blank would not take on a project if it didn't make sense. Others had asked him to do that within this community, and he refused to do it. He says, but this one, he says, absolutely integrating gardens and open space and trees and fruit trees and common space. He said, this is absolutely, you could not ask for a better opportunity. So I would ask for just a little bit of encouragement through an OCP, which is what this is, that wording that I've just suggested be included to give some positive direction to a real opportunity that could be explored. We all understand that once an opportunity is brought forward, but for us to bring forward a proposal with some substance to it, and I think the need's there. If the apartment building of 60 units can be filled before it's by locals, the need is there. I think I'd ask you to do this expediently.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Mrs. Ailes.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I think this is clear, but I just want to make sure everyone's aware that the town's current policy says that there should not be ALR exclusions. And so that the discussion here today is whether to amend that policy to provide an exemption for those areas near the village neighborhood. If that was already clear to council, then you can disregard my comment, but it's just important to know that there's a current blanket policy that applies to the whole town, and we're considering an exemption. Thank you.
We rarely discount your comments. Anyone else from the gallery? Okay. Councillor Young, you mentioned something earlier about food production mixed with some homes for people who work there and so on. This has been gone through every OCP review since I've been here, and I've always been here 30 years. And this came up the very first year I was on council. So it is an old story. But your comments about it cannot grow anything is not exactly correct. I know one of my former neighbors, Mr. Nenzel, who built Nenzel Road by Pheasant Glen, had a 5-acre parcel next to you. He says, you can grow anything on this soil. I imagine one time you invited Chris Chand, who was the head of the Farmers Market Association. And he came and looked at your soil, and he said, I remember what he said. He said, the soil I had when I started growing, we started growing garlic, and then he had other kinds of stuff, was a lot worse than yours. And I remember your comment, I was, yes, but I want to grow condominiums. So I thought that was kind of cool. But anyway, yes, so what's the council's wish? Any suggestion, any comment, or make a motion either to this effect or something else? Councilor Van der Valk.
Yeah, I just wanted clarification on what Mr. Sales had tried to clarify. So your staff recommendation is essentially that this parcel stay in the ALR, that we not look at residential development.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The decision of whether or not to exclude it from the ALR is not a decision of the town, but right now the OCP says that we will not be considering ALR exclusion applications. And so, that's a blanket policy, applies to the entire town. That could be amended to have more flexibility.
For the sake of all transparency, we may be here for a while, so staff suggesting that we order some sandwiches so we can have a break in a little while, and staff can have a sandwich. So, Councilor Van der Valk, was that answer clear?
Yes, and I would like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Councilor Skipsey seconding. Discussion. I think we had a pretty good comment from everybody. Councilor Young, do you want to elaborate?
I'm not in agreement with discouraging discussion on this, on any agricultural reserve land, because for this particular site, we've heard a wonderful presentation from one of the owners, and times have changed, and there is a need for density. There is a need for food supply, and I think we can be creative and do something worthwhile on this piece of land, and I feel that it needs further exploration.
Thank you. I think we're always open for proposals. And if there was a proposal that would combine density close to the commercial core or the village neighborhood or inside the commercial core, plus the need to have that option to grow food. We talk about sustainability, which means to sustain. You can't sustain without food. So I'm concerned what's happening in the United States of America, where we're getting a lot of produce from. And I think there's going to be issues, not only with tariffs, but by them apparently shipping a lot of workers in these fields in California across the line to some place in South America. I think we need to be more self-sustaining. And one time, Mr. Sales, you did a study of whether the available farmland that's currently in the ALR could grow enough food to provide for the people who live in Qualicum Beach. And the answer was yes, that we could, if it was used for food production. Before the election, the federal election, Adrian Arsenault from the National went to visit a city in Alberta called Medicine Hat. and it was considered one of the most resilient communities in Canada in light of tariffs and future need provisions. And they have these massive greenhouses. The soil that they built those houses on was irrelevant because they use hydroponic and other means to grow food. So just because the soil, even if it was the case that the soil was no good, a greenhouse could be developed and we could grow food. So that may be something the current owners don't want to do. But we're not looking at the current owners only. When we look at our plans to be sustainable, I think you're looking at 7 generations. That was the concept of First Nations. I went to a conference one time where First Nations in Alberta talked about what is actually sustainable. And they felt that you need to leave future generations with options. And I think that's what has driven me all these years, is to leave future generation options. That doesn't mean if the 4 owners or 5 owners of these properties had a proposal to grow food and provide housing, council would look at that. But at this point, I would support the staff recommendation as well. So further discussion. Yeah, I will support this motion. That was seconded by Councillor Van der Walt. Go ahead.
But I just want to bring attention to the fact that we don't have enough people that want to do farming. So we can save all the agriculture reserve land there is out there. But I'm trying to say, let's be creative. Let's work with growing and also providing density. So I feel there should be further discussion on this topic and not just have a hard no and say, we're not going to entertain this agriculture reserve land.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, which is basically the staff recommendation? All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Young opposed. Thank you. Number 8, institutional lands. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. When we look at the town overall and the available large parcels of land where development could be contemplated, institutional lands do jump out. And those could be churches, could be service organizations, could be portions of municipal land, could be portions of land that are owned by other levels of government. And the discussion has come up at the council table as, you know, for example, exploring churches to see what could be developed on a portion of their land, for example. The OCP is largely silent to this right now. It doesn't encourage residential infill on these institutional parcels. And it came up some in discussion, but also staff have heard council discuss it in the past. So it's before council for a decision point today. Would council like to see some policy language that would encourage creative residential options on these types of institutional lands? So municipal land, churches, service clubs, et cetera. Staff recommend that this types of policy language should be incorporated, with the caveat that we would like to see opportunities explored where those residential infill or redevelopment opportunities don't negatively impact the primary use as an institutional function. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Councillor Van der Walt.
I just had a question in terms of when you referred to municipal land, what is that discussing exactly?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Walt. Municipal land is identified on here not because there were specific parcels in mind, but because those are examples of institutional zoning and institutional land use. So I don't, there's not a specific example when it comes to municipal land under consideration. It's just that those are also zoned for institutional use. Thank you.
Given a project that may come up on, like for instance, non-market housing on nonprofit land owned by a nonprofit organization on their land, would our staff and council be able to deal with it right away, or are we already not having the time and money to look in that direction?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So whenever a zoning amendment application comes forward, we consider it. You know, that's just a part of the capacity that we reserve at the staff level to make sure we can continue to process development applications. So that discussion's kind of on the side, but as it relates to the topic before council today, you know, the idea is to whether or not to open up or invite those opportunities in the OCP as it is right now. So right now, the parcel, I think I know which church you're referring to. That land is in the village neighborhood, so likely it would be supportable in the official community plan, but there's no policy language that specifically encourages these landowners to consider creative opportunities.
Thank you. Any other comments? So anyone from the gallery? Yes.
Thank you. Jim Noel. If in fact a church decided to build a housing project or put its land up for housing, would that property then be subject to property tax at that point, or would it be exempt?
It would not be exempt. There's actually one church that has land that is beyond what they need for their service, and they are paying property tax.
But if it decided to build a housing project for subsidized housing, I'm assuming it would apply for an exemption. But if it was to build a housing project and sell those or rent them or whatever for a profit, would it be exempt from property tax?
It depends, so we'll leave it when it comes.
Okay, thank you.
Decide. Thank you. Any other comments from the gallery? Council? Are you okay with this? I like this idea that we at least look at exploring that option. I've seen an example in Nanaimo where a church worked with a developer. They got a new sanctuary out of it, bed housing on top, and some other amenities. So I think it's worth discussing. So I would move the staff recommendation. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Van der Valk seconding. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The town received an official community plan amendment application last year for this parcel adjacent to the airport, and every application that comes in has to be considered by council. So in this case, because council advanced the previous motion to identify this as an airport mixed-use area, this essentially has already been advanced. So had council not advanced the previous, staff would be looking for a decision on this one specifically, but we already have direction to incorporate the potential for residential on this site.
Excuse me, council, any questions, comments? Anyone from the gallery on this particular item? What is council's wish? This is staff recommendation? Go ahead.
I did have a question. Actually, I just realized I might have answered my own question, but I'll ask it anyways. In this decision point, it's designated for manufactured home park use. I'm just wondering if that limits the kind of structures that could be built. So I don't know if in the other decision point, 1 or 2, I think it was, 2. So there is no description about the kinds of buildings that can be built, correct? So I did answer my own question.
Thank you, through the chair. Your answer to your question is correct.
Okay. So could you put the map back up, please? Go ahead. Skipsy, go ahead.
I thought I read in here that, okay, so the report says it's inside the urban containment boundary, but then the staff report says that we need to expand the urban containment boundary to include this. So I wonder if I could get some clarification on that.
Thank you. I'm looking for that citation on the staff report, but when the town did its official community plan review last time, this was an area that was included into the urban containment boundary subject to a regional growth strategy amendment that expanded the growth containment boundary. So it is within the town's urban containment boundary. Thank you.
Any comments from the gallery? Could I have a motion to proceed with this? Councillor Van der Valk?
Well, I'm not sure if we need a motion because it was answered in the previous number 2. So,
But I think this is what make it identifiable. So if you want to respond in detail, go ahead.
Thank you. So as Councillor Van der Valk indicated, Council has expressed interest in advancing the entire area, which would align with what's being requested from the OCP amendment application. So it's not specifically required, but if Council wants to make this motion, it would reinforce that. So essentially, it would provide additional clarity, but it's not required if Council wants to leave it at the previous motion.
Okay, so I think it would be good to clarify this. And so I support the idea, and I'll speak to it some more if I have a seconder, Councillor Skipsey. I think you've heard me many times talk about the opportunities at the airport lands, but they're not part of the airport. And there are a couple of homes on it, but I think when we look for more affordable housing, where people can actually get a stake, having some ownership or lease. And there are some other projects that we're going to be talking about. And from, I think, some developers' perspective, if we had a long-term lease, like the life of a building, like 60 years, that people could enter into a lease of a piece of land that would accommodate a modular home, a mobile home, or even a small home just stick-framed. That it would give them an opportunity to get in on the market. They may not have a high-end piece of property, but there is value in their home. And if they have security for 60 or more years, and we can expand on that, I've always thought that that would be a great location. And we've had people who live in beautiful homes say, well, who would want to live next to the airport? Well, if you have a choice to live in your parents' basement, or worse, couch surfing or whatever, or you have a chance to get in on the market in Qualicum Beach, and this is not YVR, this is a small airport, and I think this would be an attractive option for some people to get in on the market. So I like the idea of using that entire piece. I know Mr. Rowe, who owns the piece in the middle, and I don't think that was a secret when he spoke here at a council meeting several times. He was at one of the OCP meetings, and he brought with him a developer from Comox, who told me that he could build modular homes, 750 square feet, for $140,000. So I think we need to provide an opportunity. We talked about opportunities before. I think this is a great opportunity. Private developers are unlikely to put their property on the market for this kind of purpose that I just mentioned, because the land value is too high. But as a community-owned property, and there were some ideas that the current federal Minister of Housing had when he was the mayor of Vancouver, Craig Robertson. And he talked about community land trust, and there may be some other opportunities. So if we can get these leases and we get some revenue, we could invest it in more land and keep that going. So I think this is one of the areas where I would suggest this provides that opportunity for people to get in the market that are working in town, working hard, but don't make the wages that they can afford to rent or certainly buy a place. This may be an option. So that's why I moved this recommendation, and that was seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Any? Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next decision point relates to an area referred on the west side of town, referred to as the West Qualicum Beach Open Space Development Area. So just for context, this is at the western boundary of the town, heading around Rupert Road, down Laburnum. And this whole area over here was, at one point in the past, being supported by the town as a very extensive, comprehensive development. Then at another point in town, it was considered for subdivision into 5-acre lots. And then council made a decision to consolidate all of that development potential from 5-acre lots into what was referred to as a cluster development. And that cluster development would combine the development potential from these various parcels in this area into one development that might be somewhere in this area that's currently forested. So the majority of the area would remain forested and natural, and the development potential would be clustered. So it's now been approximately 20 years since that policy was put in place, and some of the landowners, predominantly the province, is essentially not participating at this time because there's discussions underway with First Nations and treaty and reconciliation. So essentially it's stalled, and the existence of these policies in the current OCP is a little bit confusing for people, and questions come in about whether this policy applies to areas near there. Can they develop? How does it work? So this came up in the discussions with community members, and there was interest expressed on a few different occasions that the town should just contract the urban containment boundary to exclude these lands. And in the future, if those landowners ever kind of renew that interest in exploring development, then the town could reconsider opening that up for development. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments, questions from council? Councillor Young?
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
No, we don't move yet. We got to talk about it and
sorry.
get from the gallery. I know. We're doing okay, though. We'll get there. This happened, you're right, 20 years ago, when at that time there was a provincial bureaucracy called Land and Water, BC. And they wanted to develop, when you put the map back up, they wanted to develop about 150 of the 250 acres into 5-acre parcels, which would then have roads, it would have wells, septic fields, and all of that. And during that time, we were trying to build that ring road, or get the support from the federal and provincial government to get 1/3 funding from each level to build a ring road. And Neil Daw was the representative from the federal government locally to look into approving the road, and not just the road and for funding, but also how to protect the area around it. So we came up with a solution that basically said for every 5 acres, we'll give you 2 town lots. We'll allocate 2 town lots in this cluster development that Neil Daw identified basically at the height, the crest of that road in front of Mr. Bucher's property, actually, who has the 40 acres just off from the corner. So what we did, we talked to Mr. Chu, this province, Mr. Bucher, and the town also has a stake in this. So we came up with numbers of lots that if this happened, this 31-acre cluster, and at that time we were looking at much bigger lots than what currently people would probably prefer. So the province having 150 acres, which is 35-acre parcels, would get 60 lots in that cluster. Mr. Bucher, 40 acres, would get 16 lots. The town, 40 acres, 16, Mr. Chu, 8. And that was generally agreed to. And so we not only build a road, but thinking ahead, we also built a water line. And the sewer line would go directly to where that blue spot is with the school, so they had access to sewer, water, the road, and ready to go. And then when Mr. Campbell got elected for the 2nd term, he said there shall be no land development until we deal with the land claims. And this could be a portion of land claims that we need to settle those claims. So that's why it's been on hold. And without them being the key partner, it would be rather awkward to go ahead. Although we could, Mr. Chu, Mr. Buchert, and the town could proceed with a portion of that cluster, and we need to look at that because the town owns this. There may be an opportunity for us to do something with that land. It's just a history. So whenever this shows up at the future OCP, that reference, which is in the current OCP, should be duplicated. So there's that connection with history as to how this all happened. Any comments from council? Comments from the gallery? All right, I move the recommendation. Second, Councilor Skipsey. Subject to the history that I just explained, and I have written material. There was a letter supporting this from Chief Kim Rakalma at the time, that they would support this whole concept. So it's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item on the agenda is consideration of land that is currently outside the urban containment boundary on the south side of Rupert Road. So this essentially encompasses all the way from Memorial Avenue and the town's fire hall east to Qualicum Road. These parcels are designated for rural residential, and they've all been developed for large estate residential with essentially 2 homes per parcel. Those homes have been subdivided by way of a strata, so each of these 4 or 5 acre parcels has 2 homes on them with separate title and ownership. And there's also a parcel around the corner on Nenzel that is also rural residential, not in the ALR, that essentially has the same capacity, although it's not currently strata titled. It was previously approved by council for a cluster of rural rental cottages, and it was kind of a creative exploration of what might be possible in a small clustered rental development. So this is not a topic that's come up in community consultation, but it's something that has come up many times over the years because it's a little bit of a conundrum as to how to handle land use in this area. The former garden center is also in this area, and the garden center had made an application to council for residential conversion of that garden center, and that was denied. And the challenge is there aren't many commercial uses that are compatible with the rural zoning, so that's kind of in a gray area where it's hard to move forward with commercial uses suited to the site. And similarly, the property owners along here, a number of them have approached the town over the years asking whether they could dissolve the strata so that they weren't sharing things with their neighbor and do a fee simple subdivision. So this is up for council consideration, but the benefits of amending the urban containment boundary to include these areas would be, first of all, it would help resolve the commercial designation on that garden center, so council could consider a zoning amendment in the future for some compatible commercial use. It would allow these residential property owners here to, over time, to dissolve their stratas and do fee simple subdivisions. This parcel here, which was approved by council for a rural rental cottage development, would be more likely to proceed if they were able to subdivide and then finance the rural rental cottage section independently. So that is the recommendation before council today, that the urban containment boundary be expanded to include these parcels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Any comments, questions? Councilor Skipsey.
I just have a couple of questions. In the papers, it said that the water service is extended to these properties, but I wondered if they're currently on or using the town water. And then my second question is the impact of bringing these into the urban containment boundary. What impact does the provincial legislation, Bill 44, have on doing that?
Thank you. Councilor, Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councilor Skipsey. So these parcels are currently hooked up to town water, so they're already utilizing town water. The provincial legislation as implemented in 2023 would not apply to these parcels even if they're brought into the urban containment boundary, because the parcel sizes are too large.
Any other comments, questions? From the gallery, any comments, questions? I'll come back to you. No? Thank you. Mr. Councilor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I'm just wondering on the drawing on page 308, is there a reason why some of the properties are shaded and some are not?
Through the chair, that's a good question. It's just pulled parts directly from the town's mapping system, and I'm not 100% sure why some of them are shaded. Thank you.
But they're not shady.
They're not shady, they're just shaded. Okay, thank you. And the parcel that's right on the corner of Nenzil and Qualicum Road, you mentioned that they have been approved for a project, but they haven't gone forward with it. And could you just clarify why, if you know?
Yes, thank you. And I'll do my best to summarize without, actually, the developer is here, and given that it's a committee of the whole, maybe he could speak and explain why that hasn't moved forward. Thank you.
Mr. Drager, here's your chance.
So, Dean Dreger, 545 Nenzil Road. Some of you were on council when we got this approved. That was years and years ago. And it was a unique project at the time, and it still is. It's just we haven't proceeded, obviously. It's a proof of concept. It's blending a variety of things, and I wasn't prepared to talk about this today, but I'll do my best. We're trying to bring affordability. We're trying to bring Step Code 5. We're trying to do it in a unique sort of design. We're creating these sort of wonderful little mini Victorian homes that sort of appeal to people my age, I guess, downsizing. But what has happened and what has made it very unique is there's not many people, in fact, there are no people who are prepared to finance something that is blended with a residential component to it. So because it is it's a unique sort of combination of commercial, I guess we can call it, with residential, no one can get their head around how this can be financed. And that includes credit unions, banks, private lenders. So in the meantime, unfortunately, I've been trying to liquidate assets that have frustrated me because I didn't think I should have to do this. We've been selling some of our purpose-built residential, unfortunately. The plan was to hang on to that. And when you do that, you unfortunately displace people who you didn't want to displace. We've just recently closed on another parcel this week. That will help a little, but that won't get me over the finish line. The next target is another property that I own, which is, again, purpose-built rental. And it kind of frustrates or angers me that I'm going to have to tell two lovely people again that they're going to lose their homes so that I can build this project. Because it looks at this point that the only way I can do this is self-finance. I've committed probably 8 years to this project, so I have to build this project. I think it's important that people see at the end of the day why this project was important. I think it's going to be an important project for the community when they understand what can actually be done with this sort of out-of-the-box thinking. So in a nutshell, yes, subdivision would help in this case. It would help me separate the commercial component from my residential component. I can keep my bank happy with my mortgage on my residential component, and I can go to my lenders and say, this is what you've been asking for. We've got the property now zoned specifically for this cluster. It's not connected to anything else. So hopefully, if you have any questions, I'm not sure if I can sort of stand up here and ask if there's questions, but...
Questions? There's no such thing as a stupid question. And I predicate that with my question. How do you think something like what you're proposing, and you looked at the proposal that we're talking about at the airport, how could this kind of be an example of what to do or not to do for that project? Is that a fair question to ask you?
It's a very fair question. I wrote a report, and only I think a couple of you, maybe only one of you got to see it back in the day. It was built around a conference I went to in 2018, and the guest speaker, the guest lecturer was Denise Pinkston from the University of California, and she was a member of the TMG Partnership Program. And she was also instrumental in getting the, basically overnight they said to the municipalities, we are going to allow throughout all of California laneway housing. So she managed to do something that they didn't think was possible, and they sort of built this blanket universal policy for California for laneway housing. And overnight, not overnight, but over the next several, 6, 8, 12 months, 10,000 homes got built. So this was our key speaker, and she was brilliant. She showed up about an hour early before the meeting. I was there early too. She sat at my table. We were the only ones in this big auditorium. I didn't know who she was at the time, and she started talking about what she saw in terms of housing moving forward. And I said, "You look familiar." And she said, "Well, look at your pamphlet. I'm going to be your guest speaker." She said the future for housing, in her opinion, in California and in BC, because we were going in that direction, she said the death knell of housing in Canada, or in California and probably BC, is the cost of the dirt. The land is too expensive. So if you could find a creative way to take the dirt out of the equation through a rental, some sort of clever rental plan or policy, you will probably have solved the biggest problem with housing. She said, and the next smart thing will be people who will be building houses through a factory setting. If you can come up with a system to control your housing and the quality of your housing in a factory setting as opposed to stick-built in the dirt, you will have solved the other component to housing. And so when I left there, I was pretty excited, and I talked to Luke right away, and I said, this is it. I've seen Panacea. This is how we're going to create housing. Luke bought in too. He said, you know what, I believe in this model too. I think I can safely say that, Luke. I see this taking legs onto the airport lands. But we have this lovely little development ready to go on 545 Nenzil. And if you give me the opportunity, because we've done some lovely stuff in town, and I can prove that we do, we promise and then we over-deliver, I always say. But I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
I think you're doing good, so stop while you're ahead.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just really want to build it.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it was a good segue into asking the gallery what they think of this. So you take a seat now.
Thank you.
Dean. Anyone else in the gallery would like to comment on this particular point, decision point? What is council's wish? Councilor Skipsey, move it. Councilor Young, seconding. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, Mr. Drager. Carried. So I think we have some food waiting for us in the other room. So can we take? No, not yet. Sorry. Pardon?
1 p.m.
1 p.m. Oh, okay. We'll carry on. Mr. Seals, please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next decision point relates to the overall footprint of single detached residential dwellings. And the suggestion that was made in some of the community consultation meetings were that if the town was able to limit the footprint of single detached dwellings, it would have a few impacts. Well, one would be that it would increase the amount of permeable surfaces, right, by constraining that footprint. And that's a benefit for stormwater, environment, et cetera. And then the second would be it would potentially encourage the development of suites and things like that, because if the single detached dwelling footprint were constrained, but it could be potentially expanded if there's a suite involved, it's a bit of an incentive. So this is just an opportunity to consider for council that has come up. So there's potentially benefits. It's something that other municipalities have done in different contexts, like more specifically rural, right? So probably the most notable example in the last, in recent history was when the Agricultural Land Reserve constrained the footprint of these monster homes that were popping up and occupying agricultural land. But the same approach can be used in residential areas to say, fine, you can have a normal size house, but if you're going to build a large house, it's going to have to go up rather than going out and expanding onto the remainder of the parcel. And there's no conflict with this between this policy and the provincial initiatives, because the provincial initiatives generally are not encouraging single detached dwellings in the first place. They're trying to encourage the suites and multi-residential types things. So it's consideration for council today, whether council wants to explore something like this in the OCP, which then would be fine-tuned through things like servicing bylaws and zoning. So just the first step as to whether we want to head in this direction.
Thank you. Comments from council? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vennevar.
Okay, I had a couple of questions just around what that footprint limit would be and how would we come to that determination, and then whether it's appropriate in all of the zones, whether there might be some zones that it wouldn't apply, maybe like in the, I don't know, in the rural or some zone that perhaps larger houses would be permitted.
Thank you. Through the chair, those details we really haven't gotten into yet. There could be distinctions between the limit in some areas of town versus others, so it could be geographically oriented, could be related to the size of the parcel, right? So in other words, the size of the parcel could be limited, or the house could be limited to 30% of the parcel or 40% or whatever that is, so larger parcels could have bigger houses. There's a number of ways it could unfold, but that's the detail that would be developed during the zoning amendment process, where we actually discuss with the community what would be the most appropriate limit and where should it be applied.
I pretty much had the same question. I do have concerns about the size of the footprint, but that was my main question.
Anyone from the gallery like to make a comment? Marie, come on up.
My question is in regard to the impact it has on the developers building houses in our community. Right now, that's who we're really relying on to build more housing. And when you limit the size of the footprint, you are constraining them as to what they can do. We already limit the size of a house by the coverage, lot coverage. We also limit all kinds of other constraints, how far they have to be from their edges of their property. I'm not sure that blanket size house is a good thing in terms of attracting people to come here and develop our homes for us.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Sales, we talked earlier, not today, earlier, but before, about multi-generational. So if they wanted to build a home that could accommodate a parent or grandparents, grandchildren who were moving back, could we make that work for them, where they could build a bigger home and they're not building another garden suite on the property, but it's basically one larger, almost multifamily structure, which after those people may move away, they could say, okay, well, we can rent these pieces out. And I don't have a problem with any of that. I like the idea of multi-generational. I like the idea of some flexibility. And people from different cultures, including mine, where we grew up with our grandparents in the same place. And they look after us as kids, and we look after the grandparents. So there was no preschool, there was no old age homes, as they call them. It was all in one place. How would that kind of a structure, when it's initiated on that premise, then be dealt with after those people move away? Is there a contingency?
Thank you. So there is an opportunity to explore that during the zoning amendment. So for example, there could be a maximum size for the footprint of a single detached house, but if you're building a suite, then you can go to a higher percentage. I also wanted to note, just for background, that when Bill 44 came in, the province's zoning mandate, the parcel coverage for the town in single detached residential areas, like R1, for example, increased from 35% to 55%. Now, very clearly, the province's goal was not to allow really, really big single houses. It was to encourage some flexibility for multi-residential, but the same expansion of footprint would allow larger houses. You know, we're not seeing a huge influx as of yet, but the potential's there. So this type of a policy could be used to, you know, ratchet back the parcel coverage for scenarios where someone's just building a single detached house, while continuing to allow some flexibility if they're building suites or, you know, a duplex or whatever that compatible use would be. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was, did I ask the gallery for input? No? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's worth exploring, so I would like to move the recommendation, the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Van der Valk seconding. Discussion. I tend to agree that there is some benefit in not allowing so-called monster homes, but because of the limit of coverage already, I don't think this is something personally I would support at this time. I like the flexibility. I like the idea of building multi-generational, and I think the fact that we have a maximum coverage dealing with monster homes, as far as I can see. So I would not support this. So it's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion fails because of tie. Thank you. I think we've got time for a couple more, or maybe one more. Go ahead, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the next item on the agenda is I would say, a complementary discussion to, you know, addressing that question about how we want to handle single detached dwellings and how we want to balance those with opportunities with dwellings that might have suites or properties that may have multiple dwellings on it. So this idea has come up in discussion, and it's one that the town has implemented in other areas in the past. So the question is whether the town wants to say that when new construction is occurring, so it's an empty lot or a house has been removed from the lot, someone's building a new dwelling on the property, that it can't just be a single dwelling. It has to have some sort of a secondary dwelling on it. So, for example, it could be a little cottage. It could be a secondary suite as part of the house, but it sets a minimum density of 2. The town has done this on Memorial Avenue. The houses, as you're coming into town on the left-hand side there, those all had a requirement, or most of them had a requirement for the suite in the back. The town also put that similar requirement on the development in Eagle Crest, which is in the early stages of construction, but that similar requirements in place. So for council consideration, this would be one way of incrementally incorporating some density as single dwellings are built over the next 5, 10, 20 years. Right now, the town, on average, builds around maybe 30 single detached dwellings per year, if you look back over the last 10 years. So if that same rate were to continue, then it could be an extra 30 dwellings in the future, you know, per year, which adds up to quite a bit over a 10, 20-year time horizon, and would help address the town's housing needs in a way that really has minimal impact on existing neighborhoods. So for council consideration, the staff recommendation is to advance this as an OCP policy, which would then be considered in a zoning amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from council? From the gallery. Any thoughts? Jim, coming up.
Jim Noel, I think that if I decide that I'm going to sell my house, buy a lot in town, build a new house, I don't think the town should be telling me that I have to build a suite to go with it. I think that should be my decision, that I would build it, I rent it out, whatever I do with it. I don't think the town should be forcing me to do that from the start. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Council, what's your decision? Go ahead.
Well, I agree with the last speaker that I think we would be hard pressed to make someone build 2 units. I think there's a difference between that and allowing it, which is what the provincial government, or what we always have done, is to say you can build a garden suite or a secondary suite carriage house. But to say you have to, I don't know. I don't think that I would be supporting that recommendation.
Thank you. Personally, I agree. If when we rezone land, and both examples you used was rezoning, then it's different. But if you buy a lot in an area for single homes, we should encourage. We could do some carrots and say, you know, if you build a suite that will benefit you in some other way, then I think incentives are good. But I don't think it should be a stick. So that's why I will not support this either. Oh, did I not ask for comments? Yeah, sure. I thought I did ask, didn't I not? Okay.
Yeah.
The other point that I'd like to make is that under the short-term vacancy tenancy tax that the province has put out, these type of additional suites aren't captured because they're part of the house, part of the title. So if the principal owner lives in the home, you might force them to build a suite, but at the end of the day, they're not mandated to fill it. All you've done is created extra expense for the person building the home. So what you're trying to achieve isn't necessarily achieved.
Thank you. So was this moved and seconded? Was there a move and second on number 13?
I'd like to move alternative 1,
Alternate
please.
1?
Alternate
Can
1.
you, pardon, and you second that? Could we bring up alternate 1 on the, I forget what page that's on. 311. And this will be the last one before we stop for lunch.
And Your Worship, there will be light refreshments for the gallery in the lobby. We really appreciate the attendance today, so thank you.
Some really good fruit and things out there. So that's the alternative that's being considered. It's a bit of a small print. Can we read it out?
Yes, thank you. The alternative is not to consider a new OCP policy to require a minimum of 2 dwelling units upon construction of a new single detached building. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to put a bit of a addendum to that. I don't think it's fair to put it in existing developments, but when we rezone, like we did with the 2 examples we used, we could do it then, so people know when they buy, that's what they're getting into. But buying as the example was, an existing town lot, and then say, now we're going to make you build 2, I don't think that's fair, except for new or rezoned properties where we have a real desire to see more rental units on the market, and it did work in the examples that you gave. So how would that fit in if I wanted to make an amendment to that we would require a minimum of 2 dwellings on land that's being rezoned? Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you. So I think the most straightforward way to accommodate that would be through an amendment to the recommendation. So, for example, it could read that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that a new OCP policy be implemented to require that all new residential lots created through a zoning amendment accommodate a minimum of 2 dwelling units, such as a principal residence plus a secondary suite. So just inserting that created through a zoning amendment.
Thank you. You can think pretty quick on how to accommodate what I was thinking about. Would that seem reasonable to the rest of council to make that amendment?
Yeah.
Did you capture that, Mr.
Yeah.
Okay.
To not consider a new OCP policy to require that all new residential lots created through a zoning amendment
require a minimum of 2 dwelling units upon construction of a new single detached dwelling? Nope, didn't get it. You do it, Luke.
Okay. That's okay. There's a few options flying around. So this would be a modified version of the recommendation. So it would read that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that a new OCP policy be implemented to require that all new residential lots created through a zoning amendment accommodate a minimum of 2 dwelling units, such as a principal residence plus a secondary suite or carriage house.
Good. Seem all right? Councillor Skipsey?
I'm not in support of that. I think that, people have the opportunity to build up to 4 units on their property, and if they want to build 1, then that's up to them. If they want to build 2, I think we should leave it up to the property owner.
Okay, so I take it the amendment fails, and we're back to the main resolution, which was moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? On that? You're voting on that? No? Motion fails. It's tied. Thank you. So since that failed, I don't want to force the issue because we denied the amendment, so the motion just failed and nothing is happening. Thank you. So, yes, Councillor Skipsey.
That wasn't the motion that was voted on. It was the alternative, and I just want to make sure that Councillor Young is clear that the motion was to not require that we go forward. So it was the alternative motion?
Yes. Yeah. So that's the motion, and that's the one you and I voted no to. You agree with that?
I agree. I'm voting no.
Okay. So then the motion fails because you're in favor of the alternative, and you were in favor of the alternative? Yeah, and we don't quite agree with that. So that's fine. It fails. So we have a tie vote, and it may change when this comes back to council, and there's 5 of us. Most likely we'll have one way or the other, and that we do something different. So, and I wanted to draw attention to the gallery as well, that when you see these recommendations come to council meeting, that we would welcome input through emails, messages, letters to council that we can consider. Not everybody can attend these meetings. Not everybody wants to speak at a microphone. But if you have an opinion on any of the recommendations that are come forward to council, we welcome that input. Thank you. Ms. Svensson?
I just wanted to clarify, there wouldn't be a recommendation coming forward, though, because it failed, so.
That's right.
Just
That's
if
right.
you're wanting something on as a
No, I'm just
discussion
saying
point.
that if they would like to comment on any recommendation that comes to council,
Yes,
which will be in July, I think,
yes,
yeah, then they can comment on that.
okay.
Thank you. This has failed, so it doesn't come to council.
Your Worship, respectfully, I just want to clarify that what was voted on was the alternative,
Yes.
not the standing motion, just for the benefit of the
Yeah.
gallery. Thank you, Your
No, I
Worship.
think council didn't want to vote on we did vote on the original motion and then an amendment, and the amendment failed, and then we voted on the alternative, and the alternative was a tie vote. But got it?
We didn't vote on the original motion. Councillor Skipsey moved the alternative.
Right.
Yeah, so there was, the motion that was on there was not voted on the staff
No,
recommendation.
we voted on the alternative.
Yes,
Yes, and it tied.
yes.
Yeah. So if, just doing the math, if 2 didn't want to vote on the recommendation, but came as an alternative, that means the main motion doesn't work. That's how I see it. Unless you want to redo it and look at the original motion, if council wants to do that, we could, but by taking the alternative means you didn't want that, right? Ms. Varela?
Your Worship, could we call the recess now and come back to this?
We are, but we're not coming back. We decided, we voted, we're done. It's tied, it failed. Thank you. I need a motion for recess. Can I have a recess? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vanderwalk, All in favor? We have a 20. We're at number 14. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next decision point relates to the town's involvement in housing. You'll recall that through the OCP review process, we've spent some time focusing on who we should be advancing through housing policy, where it should go, what it should look like, and then how the town should be involved. So this question is looking for some clarity in terms of articulating in the OCP those types of involvement that the town would prefer. So when we ask the public through the survey and then also through discussion in person, there seems to be fairly substantial support for leasing lands for below market housing, and then also streamlining the process, and to a lesser extent some of these other options like selling municipal lands, donating lands, other. So it's helpful to have some clarity in the OCP so that when the town's considering initiatives, housing initiatives, the OCP can provide a bit of a guiding light in terms of what that involvement might look like. So the 4 areas where based on the input so far, we would like to see some OCP policy developed would be that we would support the town involvement for land contributions, particularly where the town retains ownership. So it's not exclusive to that, but it shows a preference for that. Leveraging rezoning processes for community benefit, partnering with nonprofits and societies, and or assisting with strategic funding and resource assistance. So those are fairly broad, but it kind of lays out a menu of options that maybe societies or public looking in would say, okay, this is kind of what the town is favoring, and it might help council in those decisions. So if any of those need to be modified or taken on or something added, by all means, this is the point to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments and questions. I think all of these actually would need some clarification because they are fairly broad. But if we look at the first one, land contributions, particularly where the town retains ownership of lands, I think I would like to have that clarified more because we have had situations where the town has contributed land and still has ownership, but there is no remuneration coming to the town for those lands other than they're either exempt from any tax or they pay $1 a year sort of thing. So I would like to see a distinction between that relationship and a relationship where more the town owns the land but perhaps leases it, but gets a financial remuneration. So there's some financial benefit. Otherwise, the taxpayers are paying for all these housing complexes. I guess we could start with that, or do you want me to go through? Okay.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Valk. The concept of the town benefiting, either through revenue coming in on a one-time basis or an ongoing basis. I wonder whether that concept could be applied to all 4 of these categories. And if that were the case, then maybe we could address it through a subsequent motion. So if you don't mind, I'm looking for some clarity whether you think that overall principle of not just spending money with no money coming back would apply to all 4 of these, or whether there's one of these 4 in particular that you feel like it really speaks to. Thank you.
Councillor Van der Walt?
I believe it would apply to all 4. It's just that if we're constantly giving away the land, which is our asset, and there's nothing coming back from that, so I think it could apply to all 4 points that you have here. And then I would like to also add a point to that after we've dealt with this, I guess.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Walt. So for discussion, maybe there could be a subsequent motion after this motion is considered that says something to the effect of that the town should seek financial compensation of some sort when considering town involvement. I'll work on the wording specifically, but what I'm suggesting is for the time being, if you think it applies to all of these, I'll work on a motion, and then you can come back to it after you've considered this one up on the screen.
Thank you. Your next point?
I was just also going to suggest that point 5 might be, and it ties in with partnering with nonprofits and service societies. I don't know that they should be the only partnerships that we're trying to establish. There may be partnerships with builders, there may be partnerships with the provincial or federal government, since they are now promoting more building. So if we could either add on to point number 3, partnering with anybody who wants to partner with us, but not only for nonprofits and societies, so we could do that, or have point number 5 where we're partnering with other viable partners, whether they be builders, provincial government, or federal government.
Okay. So do you know of examples that we can look to as to what kind of partnership there may be with the private sector, not listed under these?
Certainly. So there could be partnerships such as public-private partnerships where the town contributes, some maybe land, for example, and then the developer does the work, and then there's some profit-sharing agreement. That's one scenario. Could be. That's the most common, actually, probably like some sort of a public-private partnership. Could be the opposite, where the private party contributes the land and the town puts the other pieces together with some sort of a financial return. So what I would suggest is if there's issues or questions regarding each one of these, the clearest path forward would be if Councillor Van der Walt were to make a motion to amend this motion, and then council could vote on those incremental changes one at a time so we have a clear record, because if there's multiple changes, it'll be hard to compile and then assemble at the end. Thank you.
So are you prepared to make an addendum to this motion at this point or later? I think the word public-private partnerships captures a whole bunch of things. That was the principle that this town hall was built on. We provided some land. The people had contributed, business owners had contributed to parking. We used the parking money to build the underground parking with that, mostly. We got the library, and we traded the old town hall site, which is now where Village Eatery and other businesses are. So that's how this project came about. It was a 10-year lease with the developer, Nord Development, and after 10 years, we bought it back for $1. So there were some very creative ways of getting a new town hall with the library, with the underground parking, and at that time, there still is some private business in the back of the property, and I think there's a Visio there now still. So there are innovative ways of doing things, and we should not try to capture all of it because we don't know what may come our way. But somebody with a creative mind has an idea, and we heard one this morning from Mr. Dean Drager, that there are ideas out there that we don't know about yet. So I don't want to limit that to. There should be some words that says, but not limited to. So that opens the door for other creative ideas. Go ahead.
So if I were to make changes to what is in here, then simply with number 3, I would take out partnering with other suitable groups, and then that would be any partnerships. And also add for the, so that the town receives benefit, whether it be financial. I think if we're looking at land contributions, definitely it has to be, there has to be some remuneration for the asset, whatever the asset be. So the other thought that I have is that this definitely ties in with the WAM housing project, but this needs to be decided, or we have to have this done by the end of the year, and the WAM won't be done until February. So I don't know if that would satisfy everyone else, taking out partnering with nonprofits and societies, just have partnering with suitable groups, and then pointing out that we would have some kind of benefit, financial benefit.
Let's try and wordsmith the number 3. And that's partnering, but not limited to, with nonprofits and societies. That opens the door for other opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can, are you agreeable with that?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to come back to this after we hear from the gallery. We're just kind of laying the groundwork as of how we can accommodate what you would like. And then there has to be some reference about the town getting some kind of compensation for putting land on the table. So we'll work on that. But right now, is there any other comments from the gallery? Councillor Skipsey, from the council meeting.
Yeah, I guess my concern around this is the financial impact on the town and the taxpayers. So I'm just, is there a limit to the number or I guess the number of projects or units, or because every time we do this, there's opportunity costs, because if we're using that land for one thing, then we can't be using it for something else. There's DCCs that are forgiven, so if a development isn't paying for the DCCs, then taxpayers are paying for DCCs. And then there's forgiven taxes if it's certain type of housing units and whatnot. So I guess my concern is just maybe capping or coming up with some kind of reasonable amount that the town is willing to contribute to this, because, it could be open-ended.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments? Comments from the gallery. The gentleman in the back, you've been sitting there quietly all the time. Come on up.
I'm Peter Wallace. I'm a local resident. And first of all, I'd like to applaud Luke and Bailey for the process that they're following. It's been very inclusive. They've been very responsive. And I think what's come out of it is good. This point is of particular interest to me because it looks as though these decision points and the things that the council has been struggling with very much because this is operating at a tactical level. You're trying to envision scenarios where these solutions would get you into trouble. My suggestion would be to back off of this and look at another report that the town has, which is called the QB Interim Housing Needs Report from November 2024. And what that is a report that was produced by Deloitte. It has requirements and regulations that are associated with the province, and it identifies 6 categories of housing need. I would suggest that the OCP needs to acknowledge those 6 categories and to create policy around those 6 categories so that policy drives these sorts of tactics. So I'm not discouraging this, but I'm suggesting that those policies around the provincial regulations has an important role in figuring out how and when to deploy these tactics.
Thank you.
Okay.
So comments, response, Mr. Seals?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Yeah, certainly the categories of housing that are identified in the interim housing needs report, they will all find their way into the OCP in some way, right? Like all of those groups are addressed. The speaker is recommending that the OCP be structured, to align with the different groups identified in that report, and that's certainly something we can consider. A little bit later in the decision points, there's a discussion about OCP structure and how to make it the most effective and clear. So I think we'll probably circle back to the structural discussion a little bit later.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Yes, Susan.
Susan Lloyd. I think that we'd be better off to pull back from trying to get into details like we're starting to see here. There's so many permutations, there's so many different things that could apply. I think from a policy and just an overall guideline point of view, we should look simply at the concept. And I would also say that we shouldn't perhaps be saying town involvement in housing development. We should be looking at that the town would encourage, provide incentives, it would do various things, but in much more general language, so that you encompass all of these potential ideas. And we don't bind ourselves potentially to any particular type of assistance, and we don't exclude where we don't intend to exclude. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's Michael Krasowicz. I think I'll bite on this one. I personally consider this to be pretty much the most important one out of all of these points, because it is about agency. It actually can potentially go all the way back and question what kind of agency the town has to address what it wants in the future to happen. And so when I look at these, they're super general and it's not too specific. So I definitely feel that they're categorical and not specific. They don't really address how much money is going to be spent by the town or how much asset is going to be given up. And in fact, I would offer that it could be zero, that the town has a net zero cost for any of these or all of them together. And number 4, is really a doorway to pretty much anything, right? And it includes the one thing which isn't explicitly mentioned here, which I've talked about with people at the tables, is that it's possible for the town to set up facilities that are temporary and are agencies for building, that ultimately are like businesses that bring back money. I don't know how to name them because I don't have all the technical terms, but there are examples around the world where cities actually build themselves by planning ahead, creating corporations that are then dissolved, leaving certain assets in the hands of the town to pay for it, and sales to pay for the whole structure that's coming up. So number 4 allows for creating these entities. It goes a step beyond assisting, or it is assisting in the form of creating entities that do the work. These entities don't have to cost money. They can be a net gain. So I just wanted to point out that all of these things are offered in these 4 lists, in these 4 categories, and they do not in any way imply that the town is spending money to do them. And I think I guess that's the main reason I stood up, is because there's this idea that this is always going to cost money. But I think that's a kind of a mental or a traditional position of ideation, where we think what the town does is going to cost tax dollars. It will cost money to organize it and to pay for a bureaucracy, however small it is or however big it is, but it doesn't have to be a net loss or a net expense. That would be my comment.
Thank you. Tim.
Tim Pritchard. Through the OCP discussions to this point, the question of town involvement, and particularly with land considerations, is a major talk, but many in the public have no idea what land we're talking about potentially. They ask, they wonder about it, and they're left with one of the ideas is that this land belongs to the taxpayers. And yes, some could probably be considered, but what is this bank of land? Nobody seems to know in the public have a clear idea of what that is. So when a piece of land is it's sort of plucked out of a barrel, but we don't know what's in the barrel. Okay, thank you.
I think we do have a map and a list of all the town-owned lands, and we talked about some of them, at the airport, for instance, but there are many other pieces, but that's the one that we kind of highlighted today. Would it be appropriate to have a map in the OCP, and I know we have maps in the OCP for different purposes, but to have one that identifies town-owned lands, and then look at which one may be appropriate for some kind of priority housing groups. Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The hesitation in putting out a map like that is that it changes over time. If you think about the lands that have been discussed that are town-owned lands, like those haven't always been town-owned lands. They were acquired. So, for example, the airport properties we talked about earlier, maybe doing this airport area mixed-use zone, one of them was acquired maybe 8 years ago. The other was acquired 15 or 20 years ago for the purpose of developing in some way, right? There's been other lands that the town has acquired either through a purchase or maybe as a benefit through development. So the land bank changes, and so I think it's, from my perspective, it's really good to think about it at a conceptual level as to how the town wants to strategically use its resources, and because it's not about a specific parcel of land, because the town tomorrow could go and buy some piece of land, or someone could donate a piece of land to the town, and suddenly the map would be out of date, but that doesn't invalidate the discussion about how the town should be involved in the first place. So just offer that as a note. The other, if I could, for example, the Kiwanis project on Railway, that parcel didn't exist until about 6 years ago when the town closed those roadways, right? So that, once again, that wouldn't show up on a map. So it was just essentially creating land from a right-of-way that didn't exist before. So it's hard to put together a map that has any meaningful information in the long term.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Yes, sir, come on
up. Greg Husband. The whole process here seems to be a bit passive And there's no reference to the federal government, which is coming up with funds for housing. So we need to have some kind of agency to see if we can get in line for any of that. But I think also, I believe the council is going to have to get a little more political with the provincial government because this town is a mine of money for the provincial government. For instance, 2 or 3 months ago, I looked at all the properties, single-family housing that was on the market, and then I calculated the property transfer tax that would be the provincial government would get. There were 30 single-family housing. I didn't do multiple properties. I think, and I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was like $836,000 in property transfer taxes when all of those 30 properties were sold. Now that's money coming out of the community that could stay in the community. So I'm thinking we need to be creative and not begging other agencies so much and not necessarily putting up property, but looking for provincial and federal government financing because there is the source of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie?
Marie Noel in Qualicum Beach. There's a couple of issues here, and firstly, this is a huge problem. It's not just Qualicum Beach's problem, and I'm relieved to see some of our councillors talk about the impact of providing this service to specific people groups and having it funded by the current taxpayers and future taxpayers. So as we do these projects, I think it's really important that they are financially sustainable over the long term. An example is the railway project, where we've provided the land, and we have a deal with various levels of government and organizations for a 10-year operating agreement. What happens after 10 years? And remember that the people that have moved in here are not paying property taxes, they're not paying towards the services that are required for them. And as the population generally increases and we start providing homes for another 20% of the population on a subsidized basis of some sort, all that cost is going to be downloaded to the town and the taxpayers. So we do need to look at every project individually, and we need to look at them as to, are we getting enough money back to continue to provide the services that this group of people is going to need from the town. On another note, some time ago I sent council a letter about a mayor, and I believe it is out of Duncan. It was an article about how he was approaching the province to have the short-term vacancy tax money redirected back to his community so that they could do exactly the type of things that we're talking about today. That is an avenue I think we really need to pursue and even allocate that money towards specifically this type of project.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Yes, Dean.
Dean Dreger. I like the fact that you're changing number 3 to include the private sector, because I think you're going to find that there's going to be some really interesting ideas that will provide revenue that you didn't expect and still meet all your tick your boxes. And I think that's really, really important. So as long as you keep a broad, open mind to partnering with the private sector, I think you'll find that this will be a very interesting process. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Anyone else? All right, Council, what is your wish? And I'll start with you, Councillor Van der Valk. If you wish to change the wording or of any one, or as Ms. Lloyd suggested, that it should be a more broader policy recommendation or decision point rather than being specific as this, or whether there's a hybrid for that. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Sales, hearing the questions and comments, there's a good side to every comment that I've heard, and there is one that I thought maybe not be so attractive. But is there a way to be broader in our description of this approach and yet have some specific examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Hearing the discussions, I think this needs a bit more work. So at the beginning of the meeting, I noted that, you know, having 19 unresolved issues probably wouldn't be helpful, but this is one that I think requires a bit more attention. So some of the things that I've heard in the discussion is that we need to find a way to accommodate some policy that encourages the town to recoup that financial investment, or, you know, not just spend money in a one-way direction. And then I've heard, you know, comments from the public about how specific or general it should be. If you'd let us work on it, I think we've heard the comments. This is one that I think we could spend some time on during the summer and bring back some options in September.
Thank you. I think that's probably wise. So I would move that we defer this one until we have time and staff has time to come back with a more inclusive, so to speak, resolution that we can consider when we deal with all these decision points at a future council meeting. I need a seconder for that. Councilor Van der Valk. Further discussion? All in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So the next decision point relates to the criteria for OCP compliance. We've discussed it a few times in recent council meetings that the new provincial mandate indicates that if a zoning amendment application is in compliance with the official community plan and it's residential in nature, then the municipality is not permitted to hold a public hearing. But what does OCP compliance mean in the first place? Because this is entirely new, the province has introduced this language. We've never grappled with this before in an OCP context in the past. So what we're recommending is that this OCP should include, you know, how something should be tested for OCP compliance. What are those criteria? How are we going to figure out in the first place so that we don't have to re-debate it every time this comes forward? So what we're recommending at this point is that staff could work with the OCP Review Steering Committee to try to put some clarity around that concept of OCP compliance so that then it could be written into the draft OCP for council consideration, so that whether it's this council or a future council, we're not reinventing the wheel when we ask whether something complies with the OCP. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from council? Gallery, any thoughts, comments on this? Ms. Lloyd.
Susan Lloyd. As a member of the steering committee, I have views on this, but I will say that if council wants us to look at this, then obviously we will look at it. My points really relate to the fact that consistency with the OCP is not a new concept. The town grapples with that every time there is a rezoning application. You're always going to look at whether the zoning bylaw is consistent with the OCP. So it's not an unknown concept. It's also a concept that's been considered by the courts for decades. And I may not be up on current cases, but, you know, the courts will generally look at deferring to the town's determination because it's based on their judgment. And as long as it's a reasonable judgment, they will often accept that. They don't expect strict sort of adherence to every aspect of the OCP or the zoning bylaw in looking at that. So from my point of view, when I consider what the town is going to have to look at, it all gets back to what the OCP is and how we structure that OCP. If you make the OCP quite complicated and you incorporate other plans and things into it, then you can make that determination more difficult for staff. One example is the way that we've incorporated now the sustainability plan, because we make the comment in the OCP that the sustainability plan is part of the OCP and will be considered when reviewing land use proposals. Well, if you read that sustainability plan, it's kind of hard, I think, to figure out when a proposal comes in, whether it complies with every aspect of that plan or even perhaps in a general sense. So I kind of looked for, other local governments and what have they done to look at this. And I came across a council policy that was passed by the City of Kelowna last year. And they've taken a very, sort of straightforward approach to this. And the policy is directed solely at this change to the public hearing requirement that the province brought in. And they came down to saying that they would consider it to be consistent with the OCP when it meets the basic sort of pillars, and they have what they call 10 pillars in the Kelowna OCP. There are 10 general pillars of their OCP, and if it's consistent with the land use map that is in the OCP. So, while the OCP committee could sit down and start to look at a list of criteria, I'm not so sure that, again, it needs to be that detailed. And I think that maybe the approach that has been taken in the City of Kelowna might be something that we want to look at. But, we can make it easier and we can make it more difficult depending on how we actually word the OCP and how that's structured in the end. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Just a question, Ms. Lloyd. So you talk about these 10 pillars.
Yeah.
Are those 10 pillars connected to their OCP, or are they standalone?
Yeah, it's chapter 1 where they talk about their big vision, and they have 10 pillars. And the 10 pillars are quite general. I mean, the examples are prioritize sustainable transportation and shared mobility, target growth along transit corridors. I mean, they're big. They're big items because. The OCP is supposed to be a general sort of expression of vision and have general guidelines. So to expect real precision doesn't really jive with an OCP. And the other thing to think of is that really staff are better positioned than I would say a lot of people on the committee to really have a view on this. They're the ones who do exercise the judgment. They're the ones that look at this. And also, whatever you adopt or however you want to approach this, you ultimately should be getting legal advice to make sure that it's going to stand. Because there is a risk. There is a risk that this kind of a requirement will become controversial for a particular application that is controversial, and you want to stand on firm ground. But I think maybe there's a fairly simple way of dealing with it that might give people flexibility, and then they come to a general determination as to whether, on balance, the application fits within the vision and the guidelines of the OCP.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your explaining that, and that's, I think I'm going to vote for this motion because I'd love to hear that, not hear the discussion, but see the result of that discussion with that comment about what those pillars did for the City of Kelowna. Much bigger community, but probably similar concerns about what is compliant with the OCP. So is there anyone else from the gallery that wishes to speak to this? Because I'm going to move the staff recommendation based on what I just heard, and I would encourage staff to bring forward those 10 pillars to make that part of the discussion from Kelowna. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Skipsey seconding. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Please proceed, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item is somewhat complementary to in that it's really aimed at supporting the town in streamlining or making more efficient its development review processes. So over the last few years, the province has provided guidance in many ways to municipalities. I'll put guidance in quotation marks. Sometimes they're more like directives. But in this case, they're very clearly trying to make the process for reviewing development applications as clear and predictable as possible. And part of their recommendations, in 2024, they worded it as a recommendation that municipalities should consider delegating authorities to staff for forming character development permit areas and development permits. More recently, some of the correspondence has indicated that development permits should be, so the language is getting stronger. So the recommendation is that maybe our OCP could provide some clarity and some support in terms of heading in the direction of delegating some authorities to staff so that the simpler applications don't need to go for council review. And this would do a few things. One, it would make our processes a bit more efficient. And two, it would also somewhat mitigate the risk that the province, in observing our development processes, says, hey, you guys aren't being efficient enough, and then steps in and takes away some of the land use controls. So trying to get ahead of it, and I think that this would be beneficial in a number of ways. So this is a recommendation for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, comments? Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah, I do have some concern about this one in that there's a lot of subjectivity, I think, and sometimes there's competing priorities, and how do we determine which is the most important when it comes to form and character and whatnot. I wondered, like, how do our processing times stack up to other municipalities in the province? Like, when I hear of the city of Vancouver, and I know that it's, years wait list or whatnot, but as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, that when a development application comes in, staff have allocated time to deal with those in a timely manner. And my take is that when things come forward from the applicant and things are processed in a fairly streamlined process. And so I wonder, because a lot of people say that processes are taking too long and whatnot, but I think that's sometimes something that's conveyed in the media, or you hear it from other levels of government and whatnot. But I wondered what the reality is in Qualicum Beach.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey, that's a very good question. And I think there's two angles to it. One is the speed at which development applications are reviewed. And I think it would be difficult to match the town in terms of the amount of time it takes to get something in front of council. Certainly some are faster. Kelowna, lightning fast. But the other aspect is predictability. And that's the other area where the province has really pushed for consistency in decision making. And whenever it is reviewed through a political body, the consistency is it's a little bit more subjective, even in those areas where design guidelines, for example, are subjective. So I think that's what I would add as the second element to it. Speed is not the only factor. Consistency is the other factor, and with the right criteria in place, that's something that staff could be very consistent at in terms of reviewing applications, checklist for compliance, review by the APC if appropriate, and then decisions. So that's the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, and you addressed that because I wondered what the role of the APC would be and continue to be in this process. But I think of the example of the one over here on First that we approved not that long ago, and there was some discussion of whether it should just be approved or whether it needed to go to the APC and whatnot. But one of the things in the guidelines was that all of the parking should happen off the laneway. And in the end, half the parking's off the front and half the parking's off the back. So I'm just wondering, we're going to be delegating that kind of decision-making then to staff, rather than, I think some of those decisions may be more political.
Thank you. So in that type of a situation, staff likely would have referred it to the Advisory Planning Commission for feedback and then made a decision. The other aspect is anytime an authority is delegated and a delegate or an applicant doesn't like the decision, they have an ability to appeal to council. So for example, if something like that came forward and staff said, well, it doesn't meet this criteria and we're not able to make that judgment call, it could be refused and then would be referred up to council.
Okay. Councillor Van der Valk.
I agree that we likely would be better off if we did have a very straightforward checklist about how a project does or does not align. But I'm wondering why that if the creation of a clear checklist is possible, then would that not be available for council to use as well? Rather than just saying, well, staff would be able to make decisions if they had a clear checklist. I think council would be as well, and it may also help clarify for residents in terms of decisions.
Any comment, Mrs. Hills?
Certainly possible. You know, a checklist could be developed if that was a useful tool to council. So we could spend a little bit of time thinking about what that checklist would be, what it would look like, whether it's used by staff or council. So if council is not at all amenable to the idea of exploring this delegation, then I think we have our answer. If council is willing to consider it under specific criteria, then we'll go away and try to develop those checklists and those criteria over the summer.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
In regards to OCP compliance, I know just in the last council meeting, there were 2 development proposals that went we're asking for 5 stories, and it was pushed back that no, it has to be 3 stories. And yet I see in this review of the OCP comments that there's many that are wishing for buildings to be taller and that. So are we going to be able to be flexible, or is it going to be a hardcore stop at 3 stories?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So in answer to your question, OCPs can be specific, and they can look like regulatory documents, but they're not regulatory documents, they're policy documents. So it's always open to council interpretation. You know, if council reviews an OCP and interprets something in a way that has more flexibility or less flexibility, that is how the framework is set out, and that's how the courts and the whole structure is intended to support council's discretion in these types of decisions. So in answer to your question, council could put something like that in as a very hard, firm guideline, but a future council may interpret it in a way that's much more liberal, and that's the fundamental nature of an OCP. It's a guidance document intended to guide council decisions, but not restrict council decisions.
Gallery, any comments? Tim.
Tim Pritchard. There's been discussion here about the need for predictability, consistency, timely, and then talks about a checklist. Is it possible that the new development tracker system, that these components could be integrated into that? That system doesn't yield, if you've looked at it, doesn't really yield that much information for a lot of things, but it probably has the capability to be utilized a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. Could that be integrated?
Thank you. I think we'd have to give that some thought as to how the development tracker and these types of criteria and development processes interact. Right now, the development tracker is primarily a tool for the public to access, like self-service access for the development information, but how it could be integrated into the process would require some more thought.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? And I guess for council, the question is whether you want to go in that direction, where you would delegate the authority to issue permits on something that is very dear to most people on council. Form and character is a big part of what we pride ourselves on in Qualicum Beach. And on the other way, when it comes to a council meeting, the public, whether they're here or online or later on review council decisions, they can see that. When they see something being built, they go, oh, what is that? And they can look it up and see, okay, yeah, I came to a council meeting, this is what it is. I kind of think that because of, I think the town is unique. I think the small town feeling, the character of the town, I think to have the former character, and it's nothing that I don't trust staff, but elected people represent the community that put us here in the first place. And I think they want to take council and make us have some authority and decision-making on their behalf. So I personally, and no disrespect at all, but I like seeing these projects come to us. I don't think it takes a whole lot of time. Staff is very efficient. It usually depends on how many variances any proposal requires. That takes time, or why it doesn't get to go forward. But in general, I think when we see, and there was a great example of that fourplex next to Angel Court that actually helped the developer and the community to go through council. So personally, I'm not interested in delegating it. I think if it's straightforward, that meets all the criteria, it won't be held up here. But if there are issues, then we get to decide, and I think that's what we're here for. So I will not vote in favor of this. If there is a mover and a seconder, we can discuss it further. Is there an appetite for council to move the staff recommendation? All right, Councilor Young.
I'd like to make a comment that Mr. Sales had mentioned earlier, the OCP is for guidance, and I'd like that to provide guidance, but also not to be restrictive, to be added in.
I think by saying it's a guidance, that means it's not restrictive. Correct? That's how we interpret that.
Sorry, through the chair to Councillor Young, I'm not clear. Are you proposing an amendment to this motion?
Referring back to what you had just said, that it's guidance but not restrictive. So I'd like that added in.
Okay, that'd have to be an amendment. So you move an amendment to add those words, but not restrictive, after the word guidance. Is there a seconder for that? I'll second it because we have had projects over the years, decades, where I agreed with a variance on what the OCP would normally prescribe. And they turned out to be very good projects. The most recent one was Berwick next door, where it was way taller than we wanted, but we wanted that project because of the use of the project. And the appearance, the form and character, was stunning. So we all had a look at other projects that Berwick built, and we said, you know what, we need one of these in town. And so it was based on the use of the property and not affecting the view from people who live on the north side of it, and from the other side is very attractive. So it isn't hard and fast. So I would agree with the amendment, and we'll vote on that, as to not being restrictive. So that's the amendment, has been moved and seconded. Okay?
I just want to, for clarity, we didn't move the main motion, so are you just amending the main motion to add those words?
Yeah, and
Okay.
then we'll vote on the whole, if the amendment passes.
Okay.
So council agreeable, but not, by putting in but not restrictive?
Well, the motion would be what's on the screen with adding the word but not.
Oh, not restrictive?
Yeah.
Right. So I just want to, I don't want to push if it's not going anywhere, because with 2 and 2, it's going to, if it doesn't work, then there's no point pursuing it. So are you in favor of adding the idea of prescribing, providing guidance, but not restrictive?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not quite clear on, to my understanding, that's not what we're discussing here, whether it's giving guidance and not restriction. What we're discussing is whether we want to delegate the authority to staff. So I'm not quite sure how the two fit together.
Okay, well, if you look at the first sentence, well, it's not one sentence, but the OCP provide guidance, and then in brackets, but not restrictive, and then move on to the rest.
So what we're asking for is that Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the OCP provide guidance, not restrictions, regarding the delegated authority to staff to issue form. So we're voting on whether or not staff is issuing, not the contents of the OCP.
I agree, it's a little bit convoluted, because the OCP is a different topic in general, and so I thought we could wordsmith it in, but I think to be clear, we should vote on the delegation part, and if at some point we want to identify that the OCP is more of a guide but not a restriction, then we should do it at a later time. So let's withdraw the amendment and just deal with what's there. Does Council want to proceed? And was there a move and a second for this? It's not been moved and seconded, so it may not go anywhere. So if there's no mover and seconder, then nothing changes, and Council will be looking at proposals regarding form and character. Okay? So that's how it is. There's no motion. Thank you. And we'll try and deal with that issue about the OCP, whether it's a guide or a restriction, and that may be in some of the preamble of the document itself. That may be more appropriate. Thank you. Okay, let's go to number 17. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. There's only 3 more, so we're getting to the end, and I think there will be potentially an opportunity for Councillor Young in a few slides. So this next item is with regard to the interim residential design guidelines that were implemented last year as part of the zoning amendment. They were implemented as interim, but when we did consultation with the community, we had lots of discussions about form and character and what people would like to see in terms of how these are integrated into neighborhoods. And we're pretty confident that the design guidelines developed last year do reflect the interests of the community. And so our recommendation is that those interim design guidelines be implemented and made permanent, through a reference in the official community plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from Council? Anyone from the gallery? Could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vennevalk, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The last 2 items relate to a bit to OCP structure. So more about the overall OCP, and it stems from a discussion early on in the OCP review that we would be looking at housing, but we would also be looking at ways to make the OCP more readable and more understandable and kind of more efficient in its primary purposes, which is land use and policy documents. So one of the recommended changes is something that a number of municipalities have been doing in recent years, and that is, rather than having all of the development permit area guidelines, all the details as part of the OCP, those get moved into another document. So for example, the zoning. And so the benefit of that is the OCP becomes much shorter, right? So if someone really just wants to understand the community, wants to understand what the future holds for the community, they look at the land use document, which is the OCP. And then the development permit area guidelines, which is the day-to-day reference that people look at when they're trying to understand what's possible on a parcel of land, that the development permit area guidelines fit very well within that. So the other benefit of moving them to the zoning is that when they need to be changed, so for example, as environmental regulations change, or maybe tweaking the development permit design guidelines, those can be amended through a zoning amendment, and you don't have to do an OCP amendment every time. So this is a direction that a number of municipalities are heading in, and I think it would benefit the town's OCP tremendously if we were able to port those over to the zoning document. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments, questions from council? Comments, questions from the gallery? Susan, coming up.
Susan Lloyd. On development permits, I thought, and this is a question that I would hope would go back to staff, I thought that the OCP was where you would designate the DP areas. You had to specify the conditions for that designation, and then the guidelines could then either be there or the guidelines could be in the zoning bylaw. And I would just like clarification on that, because there is a provision in the Local Government Act that says that when the guidelines are in the zoning bylaw, then the designation in the OCP is not effective until that zoning bylaw is also amended. So I'm all for making the OCP shorter, because I think it's become quite a large document, and if we can move some of it elsewhere, I think that's a great idea. But I just want to make sure that it all hangs together and we don't end up with a situation where something is not effective because we haven't dealt with the zoning bylaw. So that would be my comment on the DPs.
Thank you. Was this discussed with the steering committee? No? Okay.
Not directly, no.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say that the speaker is quite correct in that the reference has to be in the OCP, but then the details can live in the zoning document, and that would be the recommended approach.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? Council, would someone care to make the motion, staff recommendation? Councillor Young?
The motion for the staff recommendation?
Yeah. Yeah. Just use your microphone when you're speaking. But I heard you, but let the world know that you're moving this.
I'm moving that the staff recommendation be moved.
Okay. So seconded, Councillor Vandervalk. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. One last item. This is decision point number 19 of 19. So this last one also relates to the structure of the OCP. And in understanding this recommendation, it's useful to think about all of the town's kind of major policies and how they all fit together, because what does council refer to on a regular basis? We have our strategic plan, we have our financial plan, we have our OCP, and we have a number of other high-level plans that set out things that are really important to the town. But over the years, OCPs have become, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but they've kind of become a dumping ground for things that were important to the community, but they didn't know where else to put them, right? And this happens in all municipalities, which is why OCPs have grown from 40, 50-page documents to some communities they're like 600 or 700 pages, and that's way too long. Ours is only 250 or something, and it's going to get shorter. So what we'd like to explore is the concept of going through all the OCP policies and asking the question, is this the right place for this type of a policy? So for example, if it's a transportation policy, maybe we should look at moving that to the transportation plan, as opposed to having everything live in the OCP. And that could actually be really helpful, further to Ms. Lloyd's comment earlier about OCP's purpose primarily being land use planning, and so it would help in those assessments of OCP compliance, and it would also help make the document more readable. So what we're looking for at this time is just a recommendation that allows us to explore what that might look like. This isn't a one-way path. If council wants to explore it and then we need to retract a bit later, that's perfectly fine. But if council is firmly committed to maintaining everything in the OCP that's currently there and not considering restructure, then it would be useful to know now so we don't spend time exploring that. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from council? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vanderwall, Councillor Young. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, there certainly has been discussion in the past about rewriting the OCP and trying to make it shorter and more concise, because there are places within the OCP that contradict each other, and also competing priorities and whatnot. So I think I would be open to the idea. I'm not sure if the OCP Review Steering Committee knew that that's what they were signing up for, to rewrite the whole document, and I just don't know if that's the right tool to do that, but I think that it definitely, there's room for improvement.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderwall.
Thank you. I do have concerns about if certain aspects of what is now contained in the OCP are no longer in the OCP, that we can understand the interrelationships, because I think there's often reference to this part of the OCP, which, if it's not completely visible and easy access, then that might not be noted. So I would tend to go more with having the existing content, the alternative one, having the existing content rather within the OCP, but have improved clarity about the interrelationship of various policies and plans. That goal may well be capable or able to be accomplished through the recommendation as well. It's just, I'm not exactly clear on what that restructuring would look like and what would be kept and what wouldn't be kept, and the relocation process, I guess, is what I'm not precisely clear on, being relocated to other high-level plans. How often do we use those plans? But we still need to understand the relationship of those plans to what we're looking at in the OCP.
Yes, thank you. So right now there's a fair bit of replication and some redundancy between the official community plan and other plans, especially, for example, the community transportation plan. The roadmap in the OCP hasn't been updated since 1998. Well, no, actually, sorry, 2005, I think, was when the Ring Road, was incorporated in the OCP. So the community transportation plan has continued to evolve incrementally over that time. So now the maps in the community transportation plan are actually the most current road network maps in the town. So what we're thinking is, for example, in that case, the OCP should very clearly reference the community transportation plan as opposed to trying to replicate it, right? And so that's just an example of the type of redundancy that's currently in the plans. And I don't think staff would claim that we have all the answers about exactly where things will go and how they will fit together or be referenced. And that's the process that we would be going through this summer, would be trying to think about what those processes would look like for amendment and reference and things like that. If you want to keep all the stuff in the OCP as it is, perfectly fine, and we can try to improve clarity. We think there's an opportunity to do even better, but the same thing, it's up to council. If you want to keep it where it is, just let us know. But if you want to explore this opportunity, then the staff recommendation would do that. Thank you.
And I did also want to make it clear relative to Councillor Skipsey's comment that the OCP Review Steering Committee were asked at the end of their last process if they were willing to continue, and they were. So I think everybody's on board to do that.
Councillor Young.
Just on a kind of a recap, knowing that we're going forward with WHAM, how we're going to find more affordable, attainable housing, I just feel that on one of our decision points on saying no to considering ARL land, I think we should still leave that open for discussion. If the committee on WHAM comes up with there is a need for density, and if we're creative on using ALR land, that could be something that could still be in discussion, but not to just close the door on it. Secondly, going to page 247, and it's a report overview of the study findings of the OCP. I appreciate that, it's been focused on housing and also quality of life and recreation, municipal services, safety and accessibility, community engagement and volunteerism. What I find lacking is that there's no mention of arts and culture, and I would like that to be included in possibly a formation of an arts and culture committee going down the path. The last time this conversation was brought up was by Patricia Huntsman, and it's over a decade ago. And the arts and culture isn't just about your art gallery. It's about your Chamber of Commerce. It's encompassing many organizations. And I think they're amenities to our community, our growing community. And for us to not look at that and see how we can be working together or be supportive of that, I find that we're lacking in something. Also that Patricia Huntsman had done a really good report, and it was all inclusive of all the different nonprofit organizations that we have, and also the Parts of Qualicum Tourism Association and the Chamber, and these are all economic drivers, so that's important to a community. And also is for social well-being to have these non-recreational organizations be supportive and part of our community.
Thank you. I think to say that even though we made a decision point on ALR, to bring it back to the back door, I wouldn't support that. We made a decision. That was not on the table. That's gone. But the issue of quality of life and culture, there is some connection there. I'm not sure how we would put this into an OCP and in the restructuring of an OCP. But I would love to see the steering committee help us streamline, because I think the intent is noble, that we're trying to keep it concise and for the purpose it's supposed to be designed for. So I'm happy with the motion to work with the OCP steering committee to do the streamlined structure work. So I will support that. Gallery, any comments from the gallery? Suzanne?
Susan Lloyd. When you look at as Luke, the Director of Planning said, the OCPs have become a kind of a dumping ground. They used to traditionally be very much focused on land use, and they were more succinct. And it was also easier, I would say, to determine whether something was consistent, because typically you simply looked at land use. So things have gotten a bit more complicated, the way things are. When you go back to the enabling legislation, though, there are certain things that are stated to be musts. You must have them in the OCP. So obviously we need to retain those. There are other situations where things are permissive. You can include them in the OCP, and there's quite a long list of those. I don't think that the current OCP is user-friendly. I don't think it's user-friendly for the public. I think in some cases it's not user-friendly for the staff. So we do need to provide some clarity, and we also need to, I think, shorten it. There's a lot of repetitiveness. But the one thing that I find quite difficult, and maybe it's just my background and my proclivities, I don't know, but I really have difficulty with the sustainability plan. And I think that we need to seriously look at whether that should continue to be part of the OCP. The principles, the basic principles of sustainability, I mean, those can easily find a place in the OCP, but the plan itself has got a lot of stuff in it that I don't quite understand. And so if we incorporate it in the OCP and we leave that language that says that all development proposals have to be viewed in consideration of that sustainability plan, I think that's a problem. So I think we need to look at that a bit more carefully. Yeah, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
It's a question, Susan, if I could. I think during the previous council, we decided with the climate change, all the stuff that was happening, all the things that we see happening with fires and floods, and we thought that we should look at every proposal through the lens of basically the environment, because of the effect it has and how fast it actually is progressing, faster than people thought, especially in the north. The far north you go in Canada, the faster that climate change is obvious. So how do you reconcile that? Because we've seen it as something important, but you seem to be talking that we don't need to reference.
No, that wasn't what I meant. It's the text of the actual sustainability plan that we have. So, I mentioned the City of Kelowna, and, their 10 pillars, which is their vision, right? And there are aspects of that. I think there is one dealing with climate change. Doesn't mean you don't deal with those things, but when you have the sustainability plan that we have, and there's some inconsistencies, as Councillor pointed out, in our document that you just can't have. It would make it too complicated. And it doesn't work when people are trying to interpret it or work with it. So it doesn't mean you can't have those principles and those policies, and that's not part of your vision. It can very well be part of your vision. But what it means is when you're looking at whether someone is, whether you're consistent with that vision, you're looking at it much more generally. And that allows you to take into account how things change over time. Because it is to be a general vision. We can't detail everything now, nor should we. But yes, there are principles and a guiding philosophy that is very relevant that we should have in our document.
Thank you. Anyone else from the gallery? So, Council, that's the recommendation. Councillor Skipsey.
Seeing as we're kind of opening it up for discussion here generally about the OCP, I did note that in the materials that we were provided, a couple of times it was noted that there was support for density. Support for density is much less if traffic is not addressed. And also with participants noting that density should be accompanied by plans to accommodate for parking and traffic. So this OCP is focused on housing, but there's other aspects, and I think, here we talk about having the community transportation plan as a separate document, but it really, the OCP impacts, and I think that those need to be tied together somehow. So I'm not sure how that would be handled if we're slimming down our OCP, but I think it is important that it's not just housing. There's other factors that need to be considered along with the housing.
And I think staff is saying that we can have a transportation plan, so when a development comes up, and you're right, what about parking, what about traffic, where do they go? I think staff is saying we can connect them, but it's just in a different document. And that document will be evolving as things change. So to me, it makes sense as to what the previous speaker was saying, Susan, and also what you're talking about, that they are connected, but it doesn't all have to be in the OCP. Thank you. Councillor Vanderbilt. Oh, you have this. You want to go ahead? Okay, no, go ahead, make the recommendation, we can still discuss it. Moved Councillor Skipsey, second Councillor Vennevaag, discussion. Councillor Vennevaag. Oh, okay, well, you seconded it, you came close. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Motion carried unanimously. Mr. Sales.
Mayor Westbrook, I just wanted to highlight that Councillor Young earlier had wanted to make an amendment regarding language suggesting, saying that the OCP is a guidance document, not restrictive, and we said we would come back to that later. So this, if Councillor Young wanted to make that motion, this would be an appropriate place to make a motion of that sort.
Yes. Remind me, in the preamble, there is wording to that effect. So can you examine the wording? And I understand the intent of Councillor Young's attempt to motion, that it becomes clear. I think it should be right in the preamble. And I don't have it in front of me. Do you?
It would take just a moment to look through it, but so if council would like to ensure that that language is in there, we would review it. If it's in there, we'll leave it. If it's not, we would incorporate it into the draft, if that's what Councillor Young is looking for.
Okay, and just to have it on the record, Councillor Young moved that in the preamble of the OCP, it shall be identified this is a guiding document and not only restrictions. That's your motion, and I'll second that. And question, discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Opposed? Two opposed, that means motion fails. But we can still look at what's in the preamble. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So thank you for bringing that up. This is a very democratic process. I thought we made a lot of strides in the right direction, and I think we did it in a reasonable time. So I was just mentioning to council last time, I think we had over 90 decision points. So talk about streamlining the process. I think we did it by just what we did today. But thank you, everybody, and members of Advisory Planning Commission, or the OCP Commission, Ms. Lloyd and Mr. Husband. Are there others in the room that were part of that committee? Thank you so much. And with your proclivity as to how you want to go about this OCP, I think we're going to see some improvements. Thank you. I'll need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Vennevaag, Councillor Skipsey, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.